The Alpha King's war banner burned surprisingly fast. Shani had expected the silk to resist it, was woven with protective spells. After all, the kind that cost 3 months of a court mage's salary and were supposed to be indestructible. But magic recognizes magic. And the fire she was using wasn't normal fire. She watched the golden wolf emblem blacken and curl, watched the silver threads that spelled out the Delaney bloodline promises melt into nothing, and she felt nothing at all. Not rage, not satisfaction, not even the grief that had been sitting in her chest since dawn when she'd watched her shrine burn. Just the cold certainty that what she was about to do would start a war. Behind her, in the cage she'd woven from living vines, the thing that looked like the Alpha King's son sat very still and watched her with eyes that weren't quite the right color anymore. "How long?" it asked in Nathan's voice. "Since the fever," Shani said, not turning around. "The real Nathan died 3 months ago. You're what I traded to bring him back. And now? Now the Alpha King destroyed the one place I could keep you contained." She turned and looked at the creature, wearing the 8-year-old's face. "So we're going to have a conversation about what happens when a death bargain breaks." The thing that wore Nathan Delaney's face tilted its head at an angle no 8-year-old should manage. Not painful, just wrong. Like someone had drawn a child from memory and gotten the joint slightly off. "The binding ground is ash," it said. Its voice was Nathan's, the slight lisp on the "s", the way he dropped consonants when he was tired. Perfect mimicry. "I can feel it unraveling. I know. How long do I have?" Shani looked at the vine cage. Already the plants were browning at the edges where the thing inside touched them. Death leaked from it the way heat leaks from fever skin. 48 hours, she said. Maybe less. And then? And then you stop being able to hold that shape. You stop remembering you're supposed to be a boy. You become what you actually are. Which is? Shani was quiet for a long moment. Outside, through the broken window of her small stone house, she could see smoke still rising from the eastern hill where the shrine had been, where Gregory Delaney had stood this morning in his Alpha King armor and put fire to 8 years of her blood, her sacrifice, her desperate 3-night ritual that had pulled his son back from the other side of death. He'd burned it because he thought it was in his way. He had no idea what he'd actually destroyed. "You're a placeholder," Shani said finally. "A construct made of borrowed time and my blood and a bargain I made with something that doesn't have a name in any language I speak. You were never meant to be permanent, just long enough for me to find a real solution." "Did you find a solution?" "I was close." The lie came easily. She'd been nowhere close. 8 years of research, and she'd found nothing that could make the trade permanent. Nothing that could turn a death revenant into a real living boy. But she'd had time. The shrine had given her time. Now the shrine was ash, and time was the one thing she didn't have. The thing in the cage shifted. When it moved, its shadow moved wrong too many edges, too many angles, like the thing casting it had more limbs than a human body should contain. "The Alpha King doesn't know, does he?" it asked. "About me. About what I am." "No. You didn't tell him when he was burning your life's work." "No." "Why not?" Shani looked at the burning banner, at the golden wolf sigil collapsing into carbon. "Because the moment I tell him what he's done, he becomes dangerous in a different way. Right now, he thinks he destroyed a garden. When he learns he destroyed the only thing keeping his son's corpse animated, he'll do something desperate. And desperate men with armies are worse than ignorant ones. So what's the plan?" "The plan," Shani said, picking up a second banner, this one bearing the crimson stag of House Crane, "is to make sure that when this all falls apart, I'm not the only one who loses everything." She dropped the crane banner into the fire, then the silver falcon of House Richardson, then the black tower of House Bryant. One by one, the 7 great house banners burned in her hearth, and with each one, she felt the binding she'd placed on their heirs 8 years ago begin to fray. 7 houses, 7 heirs, 7 desperate parents who'd come to her shrine in the dead of night, with dying children and empty eyes, and enough gold to buy silence. She'd saved them all, and not one of them had protected her when Gregory Delaney came with his torches and his soldiers and his absolute certainty that a shrine keeper's word meant nothing against an Alpha King's will. "You're going to tell them," the thing in the cage said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to show them," Shani corrected. "Tell them. They'll call me a liar. Show them when their precious heirs start dying again, all at once, all from conditions they thought were cured years ago, then they'll listen." "That's nuclear." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "They burned my shrine. I'm returning the favor." The last banner, the golden wolf of House Delaney, she held for a moment before dropping it into the flames. 48 hours, she said to the thing in the cage. "That's how long before you stop being able to pretend you're Nathan Delaney. That's how long before every binding I've maintained for 8 years collapses completely." "And the real Nathan?" "Dead," Shani said flatly. 3 months dead. I told Gregory his son survived the poison. I didn't tell him that survived meant something very different than he thought. She walked to the door, pulling on her traveling cloak. "Where are you going?" the thing asked. "To the council chamber," Shani said. "To watch 7 noble houses realize that the gardener they've been ignoring for a decade is the only reason their bloodlines still exist." She paused at the threshold. "And then we're going to have a conversation about what I cost." Chapter 1. 11 minutes dead. 3 hours earlier, the council chamber was cold. Shani had been standing for what felt like forever, though the ornate clock on the wall, some imported monstrosity with golden gears that clicked too loudly, told her it had only been 2 hours and 17 minutes. Her wrists were bound, not with rope, but with ceremonial silver cord that burned against her skin like a promise that this was official, that this was justice. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle, 6 of them filled. The 7th, the golden wolf throne at the center, stood empty. Gregory Delaney hadn't arrived yet, probably still at the shrine, watching it burn, making sure every last herb bed was destroyed, every stone altar cracked, every carefully cultivated plant reduced to ash, making sure the thing that had saved his son's life was completely, irreversibly gone. "Tell us again," said Luther Ellison, the master of records. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled at anything that wasn't a properly filed document. "What exactly did you do to the Delaney heir 3 months ago?" "I healed him," Shani said, "for the 15th time." "Healed him with what?" This from Jaime Richardson, House Richardson's representative on the council. She was sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, the kind of woman who smiled while cutting your throat. "Every royal physician in 7 kingdoms tried. They all failed. You're a shrine keeper. A gardener. What did you do to that boy?" Shani could tell them. She could explain the blood cost, the 7-night ritual, the way she'd pulled Nathan's soul back from whatever existed on the other side of death and stuffed it into a construct made of her own life force and something older and darker that she'd promised she'd never name. Aloud, she could tell them that what walked around wearing Nathan Delaney's face wasn't actually Nathan anymore, but the moment she explained how she'd done it, they'd realize what Gregory destroyed wasn't just a garden. It was the only thing keeping the heir alive, and it was already dying. "I used traditional healing methods," Shani said carefully. "Herbs, lunar timing, blood purification techniques passed down through my family." "Your family." Tom Moyer leaned forward. He was House Bryant's man, built like a wall and about as emotionally expressive. "Your grandmother was a shrine keeper. Your mother abandoned the practice entirely and married a merchant. You have no formal training, no certification from any recognized healing institution, and no legal authority to practice medicine of any kind. And yet," Shani said, meeting his eyes, "Nathan Delaney is alive." "Is he?" The question came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Gregory Delaney stood at the entrance to the council chamber. and he looked like a man who'd spent the morning doing something that had cost him more than he'd expected. His armor was stained with ash. His dark hair was pushed back from his face. His eyes were the kind of tired that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the slow realization that you might have made a terrible mistake. He walked to the golden wolf throne and sat down without ceremony. "Is my son alive?" he asked again, looking directly at Shani. "Because I've just spent 3 hours destroying your shrine, and in the last 20 minutes, my son has developed symptoms that my royal physicians can't explain." The council chamber went very quiet. "What kind of symptoms?" Luther asked. "Fever," Gregory said. "Sudden onset, no apparent cause. And," he paused, his jaw tight, "his eyes, they're the wrong color." Shani felt something cold settle in her stomach. It was starting already, faster than she'd calculated. "Wrong how?" Jamie demanded. "Blue," Gregory said. "Nathan's eyes are brown, have been since birth. As of 20 minutes ago, they're blue, ice blue. And when I asked him about it, he looked at me like he didn't understand the question." Tom stood up. "That's not medically possible." "I'm aware," Gregory snapped. He turned back to Shani. "What did you do to my son?" This was it. The moment where she could tell the truth and watch everything burn faster. Or she could buy time, keep the secret a little longer, and maybe find a way to fix this before it all fell apart. "The poison that nearly killed Nathan 3 months ago," Shani said slowly, "was a blood curse, not a traditional poison. A curse designed to corrupt the bloodline itself, to make sure that even if he survived, the damage would be permanent." Gregory's expression shifted. "The physicians said it was poison. The physicians were wrong." Shani looked at each council member in turn. "What I did was bind the curse to something else. Redirect it. Keep it from spreading through Nathan's system and destroying him from the inside out." "Bind it to what?" Luther demanded. "To me," Shani lied. "To my life force, through a blood ritual performed at the shrine. As long as the shrine stood, as long as I maintained the binding through daily rituals, Nathan would remain stable. The curse would be contained." The silence that followed was absolute. "You're telling me," Gregory said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that my son's life has been dependent on your shrine for 3 months, and you never thought to mention this? Would you have believed me?" Shani asked. "If I'd come to your castle 3 months ago and said, 'Your son is alive because of blood magic I performed in secret, and if anything happens to my shrine, he'll die,' would you have protected it? Or would you have arrested me for witchcraft and burned the shrine anyway just to be safe?" No one answered, because they all knew the answer. "The shrine is gone," Gregory said finally. "So what happens now?" "Now?" Shani looked at him with something that might have been pity if it wasn't so cold. "Now we find out how long a binding lasts without its anchor. The symptoms you're seeing, the fever, the eye color change, those are just the beginning. As the binding deteriorates, Nathan will deteriorate with it." "How long?" 48 hours, Shani said. "Maybe less." Jaime stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You expect us to believe that you've been maintaining a blood curse binding for 3 months, in secret, with no witnesses, and now that your shrine is conveniently destroyed, the heir just happens to start dying again? I don't expect you to believe anything," Shani said. "I expect you to watch what happens over the next 2 days and draw your own conclusions." "And what do you want in exchange for fixing this?" Tom asked. The question was blunt, practical, because this sounds like an excellent setup for extortion. Shani smiled, and for the first time since entering the council chamber, she looked genuinely amused. "You think I want something from you? After watching the Alpha King burn 8 years of my work to the ground because it was in his way? After standing here for 2 hours being interrogated like a criminal for the crime of saving a child's life?" She looked at Gregory. "I don't want anything from you. I want you to understand what you destroyed. I want you to sit with the consequences of your actions. And when Nathan is gone, really, permanently gone, I want you to remember that this was a choice you made. Can you fix it? Gregory's voice was rough. Can the binding be re-established? Not without the shrine, Shani said. The binding was anchored to that specific ground, those specific plants, 8 years of blood sacrifice built into the soil itself. You can't recreate that in 48 hours. You can't recreate it in 48 years. Luther was making notes, his pen scratching across parchment with mechanical precision. If what you're saying is true, we need to verify it. We need witnesses, documentation, some kind of proof that this binding existed. The proof, Shani interrupted, is dying in his bedroom right now. You want documentation? Watch him. Record every symptom. Note every change. And when he's dead, you can file that in your records as Shrine Keeper was telling the truth. The council chamber doors opened again. A young woman rushed in, one of the castle healers, her face pale. Alpha King, the air's fever has spiked to 104. We've tried every cooling technique we have. Nothing's working. And his speech? She hesitated. He's not making sense. He keeps asking for someone named Shani, but he's using words that don't sound like a child's vocabulary. Gregory stood. I need to go to him. Wait. Shani's voice stopped him at the door. Before you go, before you see what he's becoming, I need you to understand something. He turned. The curse I bound wasn't random, Shani said. It was designed. Someone wanted Nathan dead. Someone with access to your castle, your kitchens, your inner circle. Someone who knew exactly how to bypass your security and poison your air without being detected. The council members looked at each other. That's a serious accusation, Luther said carefully. It's not an accusation, Shani said. It's a fact. Nathan Delaney was murdered. I brought him back. And whoever tried to kill him the first time is still out there, still close to your throne, still waiting for another opportunity. Gregory's expression went very still. You know who it was? No, Shani said. But I know what kind of magic they used, and I know that this wasn't about killing a child. This was about destabilizing your bloodline, creating succession chaos, and opening the door for someone else to take power. She paused. So when Nathan dies, and he will die, Alpha King, unless you find a way to rebuild 8 years of blood magic in 2 days, you might want to ask yourself, who benefits from House Delaney losing its heir? The clock on the wall clicked loudly in the silence. Gregory looked at her for a long moment, then he turned and walked out of the council chamber without another word. The remaining council members stared at Shani. You're playing a dangerous game, Jamie said quietly. I'm not playing anything, Shani said. I'm watching a kingdom realize that the woman they've been ignoring for a decade is the only reason their future king is still breathing. Or was. For another 48 hours anyway. Tom crossed his arms. If you can't fix the binding, why are you still here? Why not run? Disappear before he blames you for Nathan's death? Shani smiled. Because I'm not the only one who's going to need me in the next 48 hours. Before anyone could ask what she meant, she turned to Luther. How many noble heirs have recovered from supposedly fatal conditions in the last 8 years? Not just House Delaney, all 7 great houses. How many miracle recoveries are in your records? Luther's pen stopped moving. Check your files, Shani said softly, and then ask yourself, what happens if they all start failing at the same time? She let that sink in. Then she looked at the silver cord binding her wrists. Are you going to arrest me? Or are you going to let me go try to save your children? The council members looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Finally, Tom stood and cut the silver cord with a knife from his belt. You're not under arrest, he said. You're under observation. You don't leave the castle. You don't perform any rituals without supervision. And if the heir dies, Shani interrupted, you're going to have much bigger problems than deciding what to do with me. She walked to the door, rubbing her wrists where the silver had burned. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. One more thing. The shrine you burned? That wasn't just my work. That was my grandmother's work, and her mother's before her. 3 generations of shrine keepers, all protecting the same bloodlines, all maintaining the same secret. What secret? Jamie asked. Shani's smile was cold. That noble blood is weaker than you think, that your precious bloodlines have been dying out for generations, and that the only reason any of you are still here is because my family has been quietly fixing your genetic failures for 30 years. She left them with that. The council chamber was silent for a full minute after she was gone. Then Luther stood, walked to his files, and began pulling records. What he found would change everything, but that was still 3 hours away. Chapter 2. The Thing Behind His Eyes. 41 hours remaining. Nathan Delaney's bedroom was larger than Shani's entire house had been. Not the house she lived in now, the small stone cottage at the edge of the eastern woods where she'd retreated after the shrine burned. The house she'd grown up in. The one her grandmother had built with her own hands, stone by stone, herb garden by herb garden, until it became the place people whispered about when their children were dying and the royal physicians had given up. That house would have fit in this bedroom 3 times over. The bed alone was ridiculous. 4-poster oak carved with wolves and moons and protective symbols that meant absolutely nothing because they'd been carved by someone who thought magic was decorative. The kind of symbols rich people put on things to feel safer without actually understanding what safety cost. Nathan, or the thing wearing Nathan, lay in the center of that massive bed, looking very small. Gregory stood at the window, his back to the room. He hadn't moved since Shani entered 5 minutes ago, hadn't spoken. Just stood there, silhouette against the afternoon light, shoulders tight with the kind of tension that comes from not knowing what to do and hating it. 3 royal physicians clustered near the bed, murmuring to each other in the low voices doctors use when they want to sound competent while having absolutely no idea what's happening. Shani ignored all of them and walked directly to the bed. The thing opened its eyes blue now, ice-chip blue, nothing like Nathan's warm brown, and looked at her with an expression that was too knowing for an 8-year-old. "Hello," it said in Nathan's voice. "Hello," Shani replied quietly. "Am I dying?" The physicians stopped murmuring. Gregory turned from the window. Shani pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, eye level with the creature. "Yes," she said. One of the physicians made a sound of protest. "We haven't established." "Yes," Shani repeated, not looking away from the thing in the bed. "The binding is breaking. You can feel it, can't you?" The thing nodded. "It feels like I'm forgetting how to hold things together. Like there are pieces of me that don't quite fit anymore." "That's accurate," Shani said. "How long?" "Less than 2 days." "Will it hurt?" Shani was quiet for a moment. She could lie. She probably should lie. But the thing wearing Nathan's face had been honest with her for 3 months, had never pretended to be anything other than what it was when they were alone, and she owed it at least this much truth. "Yes," she said. "When the binding fully breaks, you'll stop being able to hold this form. It will hurt. And then you'll stop being anything at all." "Okay," the thing said. Then quieter. "I'm scared." "I know." Gregory crossed the room in 3 long strides. "What are you telling my son?" "The truth," Shani said, still not looking at him. "Something you haven't done since this started." "Get out." His voice was dangerous. "Get out of this room Before you what?" Shani finally turned to look at him. "Arrest me? Burn my house like you burned my shrine? Kill me? Go ahead. See how well that works when your son stops breathing in 36 hours and you've eliminated the only person who understands what's happening to him." The physicians were backing toward the door now, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. Gregory's hands were clenched at his sides. "You're telling a child he's dying. You're scaring him." "I'm not scaring him," Shani interrupted. "He already knows. He's known since the binding started breaking. The only person in this room who doesn't know what's actually happening is you." "Then tell me." Shani looked at the thing in the bed. It nodded slightly. Permission. She stood and walked to the window, putting space between herself and the creature, between herself and Gregory. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough that everyone in the room could hear. 3 months ago, Nathan Delaney died. Not almost died. Died. The poison worked exactly as designed. It stopped his heart for 11 minutes, while your physicians argued about treatments and ran tests and did absolutely nothing useful. The physicians at the door looked ill. I was there, Shawnee continued. At the shrine. I felt the death the moment it happened. Bloodline magic leaves an echo when it ends. I knew I had maybe 15 minutes before the damage became irreversible. So I did something I'd promised myself I would never do. What did you do? Gregory's voice was barely above a whisper. I made a trade, Shawnee said, with something old, something that lives in the space between life and death, something that doesn't have a name because naming it would give it too much power. I offered 7 years of my own life in exchange for pulling Nathan's soul back across the threshold. Gregory stared at her. That's not possible. You're right, Shawnee said. It's not. Because Nathan's soul didn't come back. It was too far gone. 11 minutes is too long. By the time I reached across, there was nothing left to pull back. Then what? Gregory looked at the bed, at the child lying there. What is that? A placeholder, Shawnee said. A construct made from my blood and the 7 years I traded, and a fragment of Nathan's memory that was still clinging to his body. I shaped it into something that could hold his form, that could move and speak and act like Nathan Delaney. I anchored it to the shrine with binding rituals that required daily maintenance. And I've been keeping it stable for 3 months while I searched for a way to bring the real Nathan back. The room was completely silent. You're saying, one of the physicians said carefully, that the air is not actually the air, that what we've been treating is some kind of magical construct. Yes, that's insane. Test him, Shawnee said. Run your bloodline verification spells. Check his magical signature against the records. You'll find discrepancies. Small ones, but they're there. You've probably been dismissing them as test errors. The lead physician, a gray-haired woman named Elisa Payne, pulled out a small crystal from her medical bag. It was a standard bloodline verification tool, the kind used to confirm noble heritage. She held it near the thing in the bed. The crystal, which should have glowed gold for House Delaney, flickered blue, then red, then settled into a sickly purple that meant the magic couldn't get a stable reading. Elisa's hand shook. That's not possible. It's been giving you unstable readings for 3 months, Shawnee said. You've been attributing it to lingering effects from the poison, but the truth is, your tools can't identify him, because there's nothing to identify. He's not Nathan Delaney. He's a magical construct that looks like Nathan Delaney. Gregory sat down heavily in a chair. My son is dead. Yes. He's been dead for 3 months. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Shawnee turned to face him fully. Would you have let me keep trying to fix it? Or would you have destroyed the shrine immediately and let the construct die because you couldn't handle the idea that your son was brought back through blood magic? Gregory didn't answer, because they both knew what he would have done. The thing in the bed spoke up, its voice small. I didn't know. For the first 2 months, I thought I was Nathan. I had his memories, his feelings, his fears. It wasn't until the binding started getting harder to maintain that I realized something was wrong. When did you know? Gregory asked, looking at the creature that wore his son's face. 6 weeks ago, it said. Shawnee told me the truth. She said she was close to finding a real solution, that if I could hold on a little longer, she might be able to bring the real Nathan back. So I tried. I went to lessons and dinners and acted like everything was normal, and I tried not to think about the fact that I wasn't real. Gregory's expression was unreadable. And now? He asked quietly. Now that the shrine is gone? Now there's no bringing Nathan back, Shawnee said. The shrine was the anchor for the binding, but it was also the gateway I needed to reach across the threshold again. Without it, I have no way to pull his soul back. Even if I rebuild the shrine, even if I perform the ritual perfectly, it's too late. He's been gone too long. She looked at the thing in the bed. I'm sorry, she said. I failed. The thing shook its head. You gave me 3 months. 3 months of sunshine and lessons and my father's voice saying goodnight. That's more than most constructs get. The casual way it said most constructs made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. How many times have you done this? Elisa asked, her voice shaking. Done what? Brought someone back. Made a placeholder. Shani was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, 7 times. The physicians went very still. 7 times in 8 years, Shani continued. 7 children from 7 different noble houses, all of whom were supposed to die from various causes, poison, curses, accidents, disease. I pulled them all back, or tried to. Nathan was the only one where the soul was completely gone. The others, I managed to bring back enough that they're real, functional, alive. But all of them required the shrine to maintain stability. All of them have been bound to that ground for years. What 7 houses? Gregory demanded. Shani looked at him. Ask Luther to check his records. Ask him how many noble heirs had miraculous recoveries in the last 8 years. Ask him how many cases where a child was declared unsavable by royal physicians and then suddenly, mysteriously recovered after a visit from a shrine keeper on the eastern border. Gregory stood. The council needs to know this immediately. The council is about to figure it out on their own, Shani said. Because in the next 36 hours, every child I saved is going to start showing symptoms. Every binding I maintained through the shrine is unraveling. And every noble house in this kingdom is going to realize that their heir's life has been dependent on a garden you burned to the ground. The implications of that settled over the room like a physical weight. How many will die? Elisa asked. All of them, Shani said quietly, unless I can find a way to re-establish the bindings without the shrine, which, given that I had 8 years to research alternatives and found nothing viable, seems unlikely. So we're looking at 7 dead heirs, Gregory said. 7 houses without succession. 7 bloodlines ending. 8, Shani corrected. You're forgetting, Nathan. Gregory looked at the thing in the bed, at the creature that had his son's face and his son's voice but wasn't his son and never had been. Can it be saved? He asked. The construct. Even if the real Nathan is gone, can he be stabilized? Why would you want to? Shani asked. It's not your son. It's close enough, Gregory said roughly. It has his memories, his personality. It's been living as Nathan for 3 months, and no one noticed the difference. If stabilizing the construct means House Delaney keeps an heir, it doesn't work that way, Shani interrupted. The construct isn't a person. It's a magical placeholder. Even if I could restabilize it, it would never be able to produce heirs, never be able to carry forward the bloodline. The moment you try to pass House Delaney's power to it, the magic will recognize it as false and reject it. How do you know? Because I've tried, Shani said. With the other children, the ones who came back mostly intact. I tested their bloodline magic. It's compromised, weak, unstable. They can use their inherited abilities, but they can't pass them on. Any child they have will be born without magic. The bloodline ends with them. She looked at Gregory directly. So, even if you save the construct, House Delaney's line dies with it. Your choice is how much you want to delay the inevitable. Gregory sat back down. He looked at the thing in the bed, at Nathan, at the construct, at whatever it was, and his expression was the kind of devastated that comes from losing something twice. I want him to survive, Gregory said quietly. Even if it's just for a few more years. Even if he can't produce heirs. I want him to live. Why? Shani asked. Not cruel, genuinely curious. Gregory was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because he's my son, not biologically, not anymore, but he's been my son for 3 months. He sat at my dinner table and asked about hunting dogs and fallen asleep reading books that were too advanced for him. He's real to me, and I'm not ready to lose him twice." The thing in the bed looked at Gregory with those wrong-colored eyes. "Thank you," it said softly. Shawnee felt something in her chest crack slightly. "I'll try," she said. "I can't promise anything, but I'll try to find a way to restabilize the construct and the other children, all 7 of them." "What do you need?" Gregory asked. "Time," Shawnee said. "Space, access to whatever's left of the shrine materials. And," she hesitated, "I need to know who poisoned Nathan in the first place. Because the original curse is still in his body, in the construct's body. If I'm going to restabilize it, I need to remove the curse completely. And to do that, I need to understand who cast it and why." "I'll assign investigators," Gregory said. "No." Shawnee shook her head. "Your investigators missed it the first time. Whoever did this is smart enough to avoid your security. I need someone better." "Who?" Shawnee smiled slightly. "I need Luther and his files. And I need Jaime Richardson and her talent for finding lies. And I need access to every person who was in this castle the night Nathan was poisoned." "You want to investigate the nobility?" "I want to find out which noble wanted your heir dead badly enough to use blood curse magic," Shawnee said. "And then I want to make sure they understand what happens when you try to kill someone under my protection." Gregory looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the door. "I'll arrange it," he said. "You have until the binding fully breaks. 40 hours. Make them count." He left. The physicians followed, murmuring to each other in increasingly panicked tones about testing protocols and bloodline verification failures. Shawnee sat back down next to the bed. The thing that wasn't Nathan looked at her. "Do you really think you can save me?" it asked. "I don't know," Shawnee said honestly. "But I'm going to try." "Why? I'm not real." "You're real enough to be scared," Shawnee said. "That counts for something." The thing smiled Nathan's smile, warm and a little crooked. "Thank you," it said. Shawnee stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "What do you want to be called?" she asked. "If you're not Nathan, what should I call you?" The thing thought about it. "I don't know," it said finally. "I've been Nathan for so long, I don't know what else I could be." "Then I'll keep calling you Nathan," Shawnee said. "Until you figure out what else you want to be." "Okay." Shawnee walked out into the corridor. A servant was waiting, young, nervous, holding a folded piece of paper. "Message for you, miss," the girl said, thrusting the paper at Shawnee before hurrying away. Shawnee unfolded it. The handwriting was Luther's precise, controlled, exactly the kind of script you'd expect from someone who'd spent 40 years filing records. The message was short. "Found the pattern in the files. You need to see this immediately. Council meeting room. Come alone." Shawnee looked at the message for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully and walked toward the council chambers. Whatever Luther had found, it was about to make everything significantly more complicated. She was almost looking forward to it. Chapter 3. 17 names, 1 thread, 38 hours remaining. Luther Ellison's office was exactly what Shawnee expected. Floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets, organized by a system that probably made perfect sense to Luther and absolutely no sense to anyone else. The smell of old paper and ink hung in the air like a physical presence. Luther himself sat at a desk covered in open files, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the lamplight as he made notes in margins with the focused intensity of a man who'd found something deeply wrong and was documenting it with methodical precision. He didn't look up when Shawnee entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Lock it." She did that too. Only then did Luther look up, and his expression was the kind of careful blankness that meant he was actively suppressing panic. How long have you known? He asked. Known what? Don't. Luther's voice was sharp. Don't play games. You said 7 noble heirs recovered under suspicious circumstances in the last 8 years. I've spent the last 3 hours cross-referencing medical records, shrine keeper reports, and family testimonies. You were being conservative. He pulled a sheet of paper from the pile and slid it across the desk. Shani looked at it. It was a list. Names, houses, dates, conditions. 17, Luther said. 17 cases in the last 8 years where a noble child was declared terminal by royal physicians and then recovered after visiting or being visited by a shrine keeper from the eastern border. 17. Shani sat down slowly. That's not possible. I have the documentation. Luther tapped the files. Every case is here. Some of them I had to dig for the families didn't report the shrine keeper involvement officially, just noted unexpected recovery in the records. But the pattern is clear. He pulled out another file. Israel Crane, House Crane, age 6, drowning incident, brain death, confirmed by 3 physicians. Family took the body to the Eastern Shrine for traditional burial rites. 3 days later, the child woke up. Full recovery. No brain damage. Declared a miracle. Another file. Mindy Blevins. House Richardson. Age 12. Riding accident. Spine severed. Paralysis declared permanent. Visited the shrine for spiritual comfort. 2 weeks later. Walking. Complete nerve regeneration. Physicians couldn't explain it. Another. Carlton Strickland. House Bryant. Age 9. Blood curse. Same type that nearly killed Nathan Delaney. Royal physicians gave him 6 hours. Shrine keeper arrived unannounced. Child survived. Curse mysteriously disappeared from his system. Luther kept pulling files, kept listing cases, and Shani felt something cold spreading through her chest. I didn't do all of these, she said quietly. I know. Luther pulled out one more file, this one older, the paper yellowed with age, because some of these cases date back further than 8 years. This one is from 23 years ago, before you were even born. He opened the file. Christina Williams. No house affiliation, she married into House Delaney later. Age 34. Diagnosed with degenerative blood disease. Terminal. Given 3 months. Visited a shrine keeper on the eastern border. Made a full recovery, 6 weeks later. Shani stared at the file. Christina Williams. Gregory's mother. Your grandmother, Luther said, watching her face. The shrine keeper who treated Christina Williams was your grandmother. I found her mark in the medical notes, a specific symbol that appears in multiple cases over a 30-year period. He laid out more files, arranging them in chronological order. Your grandmother performed these interventions for 30 years. 17 documented cases, probably more that were never officially recorded. Then 8 years ago, she died, and the interventions stopped for approximately 6 months. Then they started again, with your mark appearing in the records instead of hers. Shani looked at the timeline Luther had constructed, at the pattern of saved lives stretching back 3 decades. You've been continuing her work, Luther said, but you didn't know the full scope of it, did you? You thought you'd saved 7 children. You didn't know she'd been saving them for years. She never told me, Shani said. She taught me the rituals, showed me how to perform the bindings, but she never told me how many times she'd done it, how many children she'd brought back. Because if you'd known, Luther said quietly, you would have understood what you were really doing. You would have realized you weren't just saving individual children, you were propping up an entire system. He pulled out a final document, this one a genealogical chart. Every noble house in this kingdom, Luther said, pointing to the chart. Every major bloodline, every family that holds territory, wields power, controls resources. Look at their heirs over the last 30 years. Look at how many of them should have died. Shani looked. House Delaney, 3 heirs saved, including Nathan. House Crane, 2 heirs saved. House Richardson, 4 heirs saved. House Bryant, 2 heirs saved. House Moyer, 1 heir saved. House Landry, 3 heirs saved. House Bowen, 2 heirs saved. 17 total, Luther said. 17 children who should have died but didn't. 17 heirs who went on to inherit their houses, produce the next generation, and maintain the noble bloodlines. He looked at Shawnee directly. Without your grandmother's interventions and yours, at least 4 of the 7 great houses would have lost their direct lines. The succession would have collapsed. The entire political structure of this kingdom would have destabilized. Shawnee felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. My grandmother was maintaining the entire noble hierarchy, she said slowly. Yes. For 30 years. Yes. And now that the shrine is destroyed, every child who's still alive because of a binding maintained through that shrine is going to start failing, Luther finished. Not just the 7 you mentioned, all 17. The room was very quiet. How many are still alive? Shawnee asked. Luther consulted his notes. 14. 3 died from other causes over the years: accidents, unrelated illnesses. But 14 are still living, still in positions of power or approaching inheritance. And all of them are going to start showing symptoms in the next 36 hours. Including Nathan. Shawnee stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the castle grounds stretching into the distance, the neat gardens and training yards, and stone walls that marked the seat of power for House Delaney. All of it built on a foundation of blood magic and secret interventions, and one family of shrine keepers quietly preventing the apocalypse every few years. Why didn't she tell anyone? Shawnee asked. Why keep it secret? Because the moment the noble houses knew they were dependent on a shrine keeper, Luther said, they would have tried to control her, or eliminate her. Your grandmother understood that her power came from being invisible. The moment she became visible, she became a target. She was protecting herself. She was protecting you, Luther corrected. She knew you'd inherit the work eventually. She wanted to make sure you had the same protection, invisibility, deniability, the freedom to say no. Shawnee turned from the window. And I lost that the moment Gregory burned the shrine. Yes. So what happens now? Luther stood and began gathering the files. Now we figure out who benefits from noble bloodlines collapsing, because someone poisoned Nathan Delaney with a blood curse 3 months ago. Someone tried to kill an heir using the exact type of magic that would force you to intervene. Someone KNEW were. Shawnee went very still. You think the poisoning was deliberate? Not to kill Nathan specifically, but to expose me. I think, Luther said carefully, that someone has been watching the pattern. They've noticed that certain children survive impossible conditions after visiting the Eastern Shrine. They've connected the dots. And they decided to force your hand by creating a crisis that would require public intervention. Which it did, Shawnee said. I saved Nathan in secret, but the binding was unstable because he was dead too long. I needed daily maintenance through the shrine, and now that the shrine is gone, the whole system is collapsing exactly when it would cause maximum chaos. Exactly. So who would want that? Shawnee asked. Who benefits from 14 noble heirs dying simultaneously? Luther was quiet for a moment. Then he said, someone who wants a complete restructuring of power. Someone who's been waiting for the right moment to destabilize the old families and replace them with something new. That's half the kingdom, Shawnee said. Every minor house that's ever wanted more power. Every merchant family that's been blocked from nobility. Every council member who's tired of being subordinate to the 7 great houses, Luther interrupted. They looked at each other. You think it's someone on the council, Shawnee said. I think it's someone with access to the highest levels of power, detailed knowledge of noble family vulnerabilities, and the patience to wait 30 years for the shrine keeper to become a single point of failure for the entire system. Luther pulled out one more file. This is the visitor log for the castle the night Nathan was poisoned. Everyone who had access to the family wing, the kitchens, the heirs' quarters. He opened it. Shawnee looked at the list of names. Most of them were servants, guards, family members, people with obvious reasons to be in those areas. But 3 names stood out. Jaime Richardson, House Richardson Council Representative, officially visiting to discuss trade agreements. Tom Moyer, House Bryant Security Advisor, officially present for a security protocol review. Raymond Bryant, House Bryant heir, officially attending a dinner with Nathan Delaney 2 hours before the poisoning. 3 people from 2 different houses, Shaney said, all with access, all with potential motive. Jamie Richardson, Luther said, pointing to her name. She's been pushing for council reform for years, wants to reduce the power of individual houses and distribute authority more evenly. That's not a motive for murdering children, Shawnee said. It is if she knows the children aren't real, Luther countered. If she's figured out that some of the heirs are magical constructs, she could justify eliminating them as cleaning up a corrupt system. Luther, what about Tom Moyer? Security advisor, Luther said, has access to information about noble family vulnerabilities, would know exactly how to exploit a blood curse to create maximum instability. And House Bryant has been positioning itself for a larger role in the council for the last decade. And Raymond Bryant? Luther's expression darkened. 17 years old, next in line for House Bryant leadership, was alone with Nathan for 40 minutes before the poisoning. Officially, they were playing games. Unofficially, that's the exact window when the curse would have been administered. Shawnee looked at the list again. We need to interview all 3 of them, she said, separately, without letting them know we suspect them. Agreed. Luther started gathering specific files. But there's one more thing you need to know. What? He pulled out a medical report recent, dated from this morning. Raymond Bryant was admitted to the castle infirmary 2 hours ago, Luther said. High fever, disorientation, eye color change. Shawnee's blood went cold. He's one of the 17, she said. Saved when he was 9, Luther confirmed. Blood curse. Same type as Nathan. Your grandmother performed the intervention. So if he's the poisoner, then he's killing himself along with everyone else, Luther finished. Which either means he's not the poisoner, or he doesn't know he's one of the bound children. How could he not know? Shawnee demanded. He was 9 when it happened. He'd remember visiting the shrine. Unless someone altered his memory, Luther said quietly. There are ways to make a child forget traumatic events. If someone wanted to use Raymond as a weapon, without him knowing, a knock at the door interrupted him. Luther and Shanny both froze. Master Ellison? A voice from the hallway. Female. Young. The Alpha King requests your presence in the council chamber immediately. All representatives are being called. Luther and Shawnee looked at each other. Emergency session, Luther said quietly. They've figured something out. He walked to the door and opened it. The servant, the same nervous girl who delivered the message earlier, looked past Luther to Shawnee. You too, miss. The Alpha King specifically requested you attend. Shawnee stood. Did he say why? No, miss. But, the girl hesitated. There are physicians everywhere, and families are arriving. Noble families, with their children. Luther's expression went grim. The symptoms are spreading, he said. They followed the servant through the castle corridors. As they walked, Shawnee started noticing things she'd missed before. Guards stationed at every intersection. Servants moving with the kind of controlled urgency that meant something bad was happening, and everyone was trying not to panic. Distant voices raised in argument or distress. The castle was waking up to the crisis, and Shaney was about to walk into the center of it. The council chamber doors were already open when they arrived. Inside, chaos. All 7 great house representatives were present, along with what looked like half the noble families in the kingdom. Children, some of them looking perfectly healthy, some of them showing early symptoms of binding failure, clustered near their parents. Physicians moved through the crowd, taking readings, asking questions, documenting everything. At the center of it all, Gregory stood next to the golden wolf throne, his expression carved from stone. When he saw Shawnee enter, the room went quiet. "Shrinekeeper," Gregory said formally. His voice carried through the chamber. "We need answers." Shawnee walked to the center of the room, very aware of every eye on her. "Ask," she said. A woman stepped forward, elegant, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd been important for a very long time. "I'm Christina Williams," she said. "House Delaney matriarch. 23 years ago, I was dying. A shrinekeeper saved my life. Was that you?" "No," Shawnee said. "That was my grandmother. And these children?" Christina gestured to the gathering. "The ones showing symptoms. The ones who recovered from impossible conditions over the last 8 years. Was that you?" Shawnee looked at the children. Saw Raymond Bryant, pale and feverish, leaning against his father. Saw Mindy Blevins, House Richardson's pride, looking confused and frightened. Saw Israel Crane, young and strong and trying very hard not to show fear. Saw Nathan, or the thing that looked like Nathan, standing near Gregory, those wrong-colored eyes watching her with an expression that was part hope and part resignation. "Yes," Shawnee said. "Some of them, not all." "How many?" Jamie Richardson demanded. She was standing near Mindy, one hand on the girl's shoulder in a gesture that looked protective but might have been controlling. 17 interventions over 30 years, Luther said, stepping forward. 14 still living, all of them bound through the shrine on the eastern border, all of them now failing because the shrine was destroyed. The room erupted. Accusations, questions, demands, parents shouting over each other, council members trying to maintain order, physicians attempting to document symptoms while avoiding being trampled. Gregory let it go for 30 seconds. Then he slammed his hand against the arm of the throne, and the sound cracked through the chamber like thunder. "Silence. Everyone sit down," Gregory said. "Now." They sat. Gregory looked at Shawnee. "Can you save them?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been researching alternatives to the shrine binding for 8 years. I haven't found anything viable. The shrine took 3 decades to build. The ground itself was transformed by years of blood sacrifice, specific plants cultivated under specific conditions, rituals performed daily to maintain the necessary magical resonance. You can't recreate that in 36 hours. So they're all going to die," a man said. Tom Moyer, looking at his son, a boy of about 12 who was sitting very still, very quiet. "Unless we find another way," Shawnee said. "What other way?" Jamie demanded. "You just said there isn't one." "There isn't one I've found," Shawnee corrected. "That doesn't mean one doesn't exist. It means I need help. I need access to every text on blood magic in the Royal Library. I need consultation with every mage in the kingdom who specializes in binding work. And I need time to research without being interrupted by interrogations and accusations." "You need help," Christina said slowly, "to fix a problem you created by performing illegal blood magic on noble children without their families' consent." The room went very quiet. Shawnee looked at Christina directly. "Your son," she said, "burned my shrine because he thought it was in his way. He destroyed 30 years of protection work because he didn't understand what he was looking at. And now you're standing in this chamber blaming ME for trying to save children your royal physicians declared unsavable? You performed forbidden magic." "I performed the only magic that worked," Shawnee interrupted. "Your physicians failed. Your healing wards failed. Your expensive consultants and imported specialists failed. I succeeded. And the price for that success was 8 years of daily ritual work, 7 years of my own life traded to pull Nathan back, and watching every family I saved treat me like I was invisible until the moment you needed me again." She looked around the room. "So yes," she said, "I need help, and you're going to give it to me. Because the alternative is watching your children die knowing that you let it happen because you were more concerned with the legality of blood magic than with keeping them alive." No one spoke. Finally, Gregory said, "What do you need?" "Access to the Royal Library, 3 mages with binding specialization, 24 hours of uninterrupted research time, and protection from anyone who decides I'm easier to blame than help. 24. "Done," Gregory said. "Luther, arrange the library access. Jaime, contact the mages. Tom, assign guards to protect the shrine keeper while she works." They moved immediately. No questions, no arguments. Gregory looked at Shawnee. 34 hours, he said. "That's what we have. Make them count." Shawnee nodded. Then she noticed something. Raymond Bryant was staring at her with an expression that wasn't fever confusion. It was recognition, and something else. Fear. Before she could process what that meant, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A guard rushed in, breathing hard. "Alpha King," he said, "we have a problem. One of the bound children, Israel Crane, he's collapsed. The physicians say his binding is failing faster than the others. They're giving him 6 hours." Everyone looked at the young man standing near the Crane family representative. Israel Crane, 20 years old, saved when he was 6 from a drowning that should have killed him. He was pale, shaking, and his eyes were shifting color even as they watched brown to blue to gray to something that wasn't quite any human color. 6 hours, Shawnee said quietly. "Can you save him?" Gregory asked. Shawnee looked at Israel, at the boy she'd never met, who her grandmother had saved 14 years ago, who was now dying because Shawnee hadn't been able to protect the shrine. "I can try," she said. Then she walked out of the council chamber toward the library, toward whatever research might save 14 children in 34 hours, toward a solution that might not exist. Behind her, the noble families began to argue again. But Shawnee wasn't listening. She was already running through ritual variations in her head, already planning which texts to check first, already calculating how much of her own life she could trade if it came down to that. 34 hours. 14 lives. 1 chance. She'd worked with worse odds before. Chapter 4. Where Death Sleeps. 32 hours remaining. The Royal Library occupied the entire western tower of the castle, 5 floors of books, scrolls, and magical texts accumulated over 3 centuries of Delaney rule. Most of it was decorative. Histories written by people who wanted to flatter whoever was in power at the time. Poetry that rhymed but said nothing. Political treatises that were outdated the moment they were written. But the 5th floor, the restricted collection, was different. That's where they kept the dangerous knowledge. The books on blood magic and forbidden rituals. The texts that explained how to do things the kingdom officially condemned. The collected wisdom of shrine keepers and hedge mages and wild practitioners who'd been executed or exiled but whose work had been preserved because knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, was too valuable to destroy completely. Shawnee had never been allowed in the restricted collection before. Now she had 3 royal mages, unlimited access, and a clock that was ticking down to 14 dead children. She spread her grandmother's journal across the central table, the leather-bound book that had been her inheritance, filled with notes and ritual diagrams and careful documentation of 30 years of interventions. Next to it, she laid out her own notes from the last 8 years. Side by side, the 2 journals told a story of continuous adaptation, constant experimentation, and a pattern of success built on methods that no official magical institution would ever approve. The 3 mages Gregory had assigned stood around the table, looking at the journals with varying degrees of fascination and horror. The first was Elsa Moses, elderly, sharp-eyed, with the kind of precision that came from 60 years of working with binding magic in controlled, approved, completely legal ways. She was reading Shani's grandmother's notes with the focused attention of someone encountering a completely new magical paradigm. The second was Jonathan Lee Younger, maybe 30, with the nervous energy of a researcher who'd spent his entire career playing by the rules and was now being asked to break them. He kept glancing at the door like he expected someone to burst in and arrest them all. The third was Bruce Landry, middle-aged, quiet, with scarred hands that suggested he'd done more practical magic than theoretical. He was the one actually touching the journals, running his fingers over the ritual diagrams like he was trying to understand them through touch as much as sight. "This is impossible," Jonathan said for the third time. "Blood sacrifice magic requires consent from both parties. You can't just reach across the threshold and pull someone back without their active participation in the ritual." "And yet," Bruce said mildly, "she did it 17 times. She claims she did it 17 times. "We have documentation," Elsa interrupted. She pointed to a passage in the grandmother's journal. "Look at the anchor points she established. She's using the plants themselves as conduits. Each herb species is attuned to a specific type of healing. She's not just growing a garden, she's building a massive, distributed magical array." Shani nodded. Every plant was placed according to lunar cycles, planetary alignments, and the specific needs of the binding. White moonflowers for spirit anchoring, bloodroot for life force transfer, nightshade for death threshold navigation. It took 8 years to establish the full array, and another year before it was stable enough to perform interventions. "That level of planning," Elsa said slowly, "suggests your grandmother understood binding theory at a level that exceeds anything I've seen in official magical texts." "She had 40 years to develop it," Shani said. "She started working on the shrine when she was 20. By the time she died at 60, she'd perfected a system that could reliably bring back children from conditions the royal physicians couldn't touch." "Reliably," Jonathan repeated. "Except for Nathan Delaney, who came back wrong." "Nathan was dead for 11 minutes, Shani said. "Every other child was dead for less than 5. There's a threshold. Past that point, the soul fragment's too much to pull back intact. Nathan was the first time I pushed past the safe window." "Why?" Bruce asked. "Why risk it if you knew it might not work?" Shani was quiet for a moment. "Because Gregory Delaney was standing outside the shrine at dawn with soldiers," she said finally. "Because he was demanding I give up the land for his expansion project. Because I knew that if I couldn't prove the shrine's value, he'd burn it anyway. So when Nathan died, I took a chance. I thought if I could save the Alpha King's heir, it would buy me protection. Buy me time. Instead," Elsa said, "you created a construct that required constant maintenance and drew attention to exactly what you were trying to hide." "Yes, that," Bruce said, "was stupid." "I know," Shani snapped. Then, quieter, "I know. I was desperate. I made a bad call, and now 14 children are paying for it." Elsa pulled over one of the restricted collection texts, a massive tome, bound in what looked uncomfortably like human skin. "This is the Codex of Threshold Magic, 3rd century. Written by a practitioner named Miranda, who was executed for bringing back her husband from death. The text survived because it was too valuable to destroy." She opened it to a marked page. "According to this, the key to permanent resurrection isn't the initial pullback, it's the anchoring afterward. You need to bind the restored soul to a living vessel, a body that's still viable, and then anchor that binding to something external, a place, an object, a continuous source of magical energy. That's what the shrine was," Shani said. "The external anchor." "Right, but here's the problem." Elsa pointed to a diagram. "The anchor has to be proportional to the binding. One person, one shrine, that's sustainable. But you're maintaining 14 separate bindings through a single anchor point. The magical load on that shrine must have been enormous." "It was," Shani confirmed. "I was performing maintenance rituals 6 hours a day by the end." The plants were growing faster than normal, dying faster, cycling through life and death in patterns that were visibly unnatural. The shrine was eating itself, trying to sustain the load. So, even if Gregory hadn't burned it, Bruce said, it was going to collapse eventually. I had maybe 2 more years, Shawnee said. I was looking for alternative solutions, trying to find a way to transfer the bindings to individual anchors so each child could be independent, but I hadn't figured it out yet. Jonathan was reading through another text, this one on distributed binding theory. What if we reverse the approach? Instead of one shrine holding 14 bindings, what if we create 14 individual anchor points? We don't have time to build 14 shrines, Shani said. Not shrines, Jonathan said. Personal anchors, objects that each child carries with them. Amulets, rings, something physical that can hold the binding. Elsa shook her head. Personal anchors don't have the magical capacity. You'd need something with inherent power, a family heirloom with generations of bloodline magic already invested in it. And even then, it would only buy you months, not years. Months is better than days, Bruce said. Is it? Shani asked. If we give each family an amulet that keeps their child alive for 6 months, and then in 6 months the amulet fails and the child dies anyway, have we actually solved anything? Or have we just delayed the inevitable? We've bought time to research a permanent solution, Jonathan argued. We've had 8 years to research a permanent solution, Shani shot back. I didn't find one. My grandmother had 40 years and didn't find one. What makes you think 6 more months will make a difference? The room went quiet. Finally, Elsa said, because this time, you're not working alone. You're not hiding what you're doing from the noble families. You have access to resources your grandmother never had: official magical texts, royal mages, funding for research. You have legitimacy. I have desperation, Shani corrected. The moment these children are stable, the noble families will go back to treating me like a threat to be controlled or eliminated. Not if you give them something they need more than control, Bruce said. Everyone looked at him. Right now, Bruce continued, you're the single point of failure. You die, all the children die. That makes you incredibly valuable, but it also makes you incredibly vulnerable. The families have to keep you alive, but they also have every incentive to contain you. So what's the alternative? Shani asked. Make it so they need you powerful, not imprisoned, Bruce said. Teach other people the binding techniques. Create a network of shrine keepers. Distribute the knowledge so that you're not the only one who can maintain these children. That's even more dangerous, Jonathan said. Blood magic knowledge in the hands of multiple practitioners is exactly what we had for centuries before the noble families decided to centralize magical education under royal control, Bruce interrupted. Shrine keepers used to be common. Every village had one. Then the kingdoms decided they wanted monopoly on magical power, and they criminalized anything that happened outside official institutions. He looked at Shani. Your grandmother was keeping alive a tradition that predates the current power structure. Maybe instead of trying to hide that, you lean into it. You make it official. You establish the shrine keepers as a recognized magical order with legal protection and institutional support. The noble families would never agree to that, Shani said. The noble families, Elsa said quietly, have 14 children who are dying. Right now they'll agree to almost anything. Shani looked at her grandmother's journal, at 40 years of careful secrecy, of invisible work, of protecting people who would never acknowledge the protection. Her grandmother had chosen invisibility as survival strategy. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. Okay, Shani said. Let's say we do this. Let's say we create personal anchors for each child, by 6 months, and use that time to establish the shrine keepers as an official order. What do we need? Family heirlooms, Elsa said immediately. Something from each house with enough generational power to hold a binding. The older the better. Blood from each child, Bruce added. Fresh blood, willingly given. That's the key to making the binding personal, rather than place-based. And a ritual space, Jonathan said. We can't use the shrine it's ash. We need somewhere with natural magical resonance. A place where the threshold between life and death is already thin. They all looked at each other. The crypt, Elsa said. Shani felt a chill run down her spine. The royal crypt? 5 levels below the castle, Elsa confirmed. Where every Delaney Alpha for the last 300 years is buried. The concentration of death magic down there is intense. It's why visitors report feeling watched, why guards refuse night shifts near the entrance. The threshold is thin in that space. That's consecrated ground, Jonathan protested. Using it for blood magic rituals, consecrated to death, Bruce interrupted. Which is exactly what we're working with. We're not desecrating anything. We're using the space for its intended purpose, managing the boundary between life and death. Shani thought about it. A crypt full of dead alphas. A space saturated with death magic and family power. It was dangerous, unstable, and probably illegal on multiple levels. It was also their best option. How long will it take to prepare? She asked. To gather the heirlooms and get consent from the families? Elsa calculated. 3 hours if we're fast. And Gregory pushes them. To set up the ritual space in the crypt? Bruce considered. 4 hours. Maybe 5, if we need to reinforce the containment wards. And to perform the actual binding ritual for 14 children? Jonathan pulled out a calculation chart. Individual bindings take approximately 40 minutes each if we're doing them sequentially. 14 times 40 is, he paused, 9 hours and 20 minutes, plus setup time between each ritual. Shani did the math in her head. That's 16 hours total. We have 32 hours before the first binding fails completely. That's cutting it close. It's cutting it impossibly close if anything goes wrong, Elsa said. If even one family refuses to provide an heirloom, if one child refuses to give blood, if the crypt space isn't suitable, then we adapt, Shani said. We don't have the luxury of perfect planning. We work with what we have and we improvise the rest. She looked at the 3 mages. I need you to handle the ritual preparation. I'll work with Gregory to get the families on board. We meet at the crypt entrance in 4 hours with everything we need, and we start the bindings immediately. What about Israel Crane? Jonathan asked. The guard said he had 6 hours. That was 2 hours ago. If his binding is failing faster than the others, then we do his first, Shani said. We get the ritual right with him, and then we replicate it for the others. And if we get it wrong? Elsa asked quietly. Shani met her eyes. Then Israel dies, and we figure out what went wrong before we try the next one. The brutal practicality of it hung in the air. I'll start gathering materials, Bruce said, breaking the silence. He began pulling books from the shelves, marking pages, making lists. Jonathan moved to a different section, pulling texts on crypt magic and threshold work. Elsa stayed at the table with Shani. Your grandmother would be proud, she said quietly. What you're doing, taking her work and making it official, making it sustainable, that takes courage. My grandmother would tell me I'm being reckless, Shani said. She spent 40 years being invisible specifically to avoid this kind of attention. And she died, Elsa said gently. Still invisible, still unrecognized, with all her knowledge locked in a journal that only one person could read. Is that really what you want? Shani looked at the journal, at her grandmother's careful handwriting, at 40 years of saved lives documented in clinical detail without any credit, any acknowledgement, any protection. No, she said. I want something different. Then make it different, Elsa said. You have the power, the knowledge, and for the first time, you have the attention. Use it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Gregory entered without waiting for permission. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much responsibility for too long. The families are gathered, he said. They're arguing about who's at fault, what should be done with you, whether this is divine punishment for practicing blood magic. It's chaos. I need them organized, not arguing, Shani said. I need consent forms signed, heirlooms gathered, children prepared for the ritual. Can you make that happen? I can try. Gregory paused. But there's something you should know. 3 families are refusing to participate. They're saying they'd rather let their children die than allow you to perform unnatural magic on them. Shani felt something cold settle in her stomach. Which families? House Moyer, House Landry, and House Bowen. 3 families, 3 children, 3 bindings that would fail in the next 30 hours regardless of what Shani did. Let me talk to them, she said. I don't think. Let me talk to them, Shani repeated. You're the Alpha King. You represent authority, law, the system. They're arguing with the system. They need to hear from someone who represents something different. Gregory looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Council chamber. 20 minutes. I'll have them there. He left. Shani stood, gathering her grandmother's journal and her own notes. What are you going to say to them? Elsa asked. I don't know yet, Shani said honestly, but I have 20 minutes to figure it out. She walked out of the library, down the spiraling stairs, through corridors that were becoming familiar despite having been in the castle for less than a day. 20 minutes to convince 3 families to let her save their children. 20 minutes to either expand or destroy everything she was trying to build. She'd worked with worse odds, but not by much. 18 minutes later. The council chamber was quieter than before. The chaos had been replaced by something colder, the kind of quiet that comes when people have made up their minds and are waiting for someone to give them an excuse to act on their decision. 3 families stood on one side of the chamber. Tom Moyer and his son, a boy of 12 with brown eyes that were starting to show flecks of gray. Bruce Landry's brother, Thomas Landry, with his daughter, a girl of 10 who was shaking despite trying to stand still. And Nathan Bowen, representing House Bowen, with his nephew, a teenager of 16 who looked angry rather than scared. Gregory stood near the throne, arms crossed, watching. Shani walked to the center of the chamber. I understand you're refusing treatment, she said. No preamble, no diplomatic softening. We're refusing unnatural magic performed by an unlicensed practitioner, Tom Moyer said. His voice was steady, but Shani could see the way his hand gripped his son's shoulder. Whatever you did to these children 8 years ago was done without consent. We won't compound that violation by allowing you to do it again. Your son is going to die, Shani said flatly. We all die. He's going to die in 28 hours, painfully. As his binding unravels, he'll lose coherence. First, his memories will fragment, then his physical form will destabilize. He'll be conscious for most of it, and there's nothing your royal physicians can do to ease that process. Tom's jaw tightened. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to tell you the truth, Shani said. I've watched bindings fail. I've seen what happens when the magic unravels. If you want your son to die in agony so you can prove a point about unnatural magic, that's your choice. But make it with full knowledge of what you're choosing. Tomas Landry stepped forward. My daughter was dead. You brought her back without asking permission. You've kept her alive with secret rituals that we knew nothing about. How do we know you're not the reason she's dying in the first place? Because the reason she's dying is that Gregory Delaney burned the shrine that was keeping her stable, Shani said. She looked at Gregory. Isn't that right, Alpha King? Gregory's expression didn't change. The shrine was destroyed. That's accurate. So you're blaming the Alpha King? Nathan Bowen asked. I'm stating facts, Shani said. Your nephew died when he was 8. I brought him back. I maintained his binding for 8 years through daily rituals at the shrine. The shrine was destroyed. The binding is failing. Those are the facts. You can assign blame however you want. And your solution, Tom said, is to perform another binding ritual in the royal crypt. using blood magic that's been illegal for 3 centuries. Why should we trust that this time will be different? Shani was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because this time you'll be watching. Every step of the ritual will be documented. Every mage in the kingdom can review my work. You'll have full transparency, full consent, full understanding of exactly what I'm doing and why. The only thing I did in secret 8 years ago was save your children's lives when no one else could. This time, I'm offering to do it in daylight. Why? Nathan demanded. Why the sudden transparency? Because hiding didn't protect the shrine, Shani said. Because invisibility didn't keep your children safe. Because I'm tired of working in secret while you benefit from my work and then condemn me for providing it. She looked at each of them in turn. I could let your children die, she said. I could walk away right now, leave the castle, disappear into the eastern woods, and watch this entire system collapse from a distance. That would be easier. That would be safer for me. But I'm not going to do that. Because unlike you, I actually value these children's lives more than I value my pride. The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Tom's son spoke up. His voice was young, uncertain. Dad, I don't want to die. Tom looked down at his boy, at the gray flecks spreading through his eyes, at the slight tremor in his hands that meant the binding was already starting to fail. I know, Tom said quietly. Then let her try, the boy said. Please. Tom closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked at Shani. What do you need from us? A family heirloom, Shani said. Something with generational power. Your blood, willingly given, and your son's consent to the ritual. You have it, Tom said. Shani turned to Tomas Landry. His daughter was crying silently, tears running down her face without sound. Please, the girl whispered. I don't want to forget everything. I don't want to stop being me. Tomas looked at his daughter, then at Shani. If this goes wrong, he said, if she suffers because of your ritual, then you can hold me accountable, Shani said, publicly, legally, however you want, but give me the chance to try. Tomas nodded slowly. Okay. That left Nathan Bowen and his nephew. The teenager was staring at Shani with an expression that was equal parts anger and terror. I remember dying, he said suddenly. I've never told anyone, but I remember. I was 8. There was a fire. I was trapped. I couldn't breathe. And then I was somewhere else. Somewhere dark and cold. And I could hear someone calling me back. A woman's voice. Telling me to hold on. Telling me to follow the light. He looked at Shani. That was you? That was my grandmother, Shani said gently. You died before I started practicing. She's the one who brought you back. Is she still alive? No, she died when you were 12. The teenager processed that. So she saved me, maintained the binding for 4 years, and then died without ever telling anyone what she'd done. Yes. Why? Because she believed that saving lives was its own reward, Shani said. She didn't need recognition or gratitude or acknowledgement. She just needed to know that children who would have died were alive because of her work. The teenager looked at his uncle. I want to do the ritual. You don't understand what you're agreeing to, Nathan said. I understand that I'm dying, the teenager said. I understand that this woman is offering to save me, again. And I understand that refusing because of pride or fear, or whatever you're feeling, is stupid. He turned to Shani. What's your name? He asked. Shani. I'm Alan, he said. Alan Gill. And I consent to your ritual. Do whatever you need to do to keep me alive. Nathan Bowen looked at his nephew. At the boy who'd been given to him to raise after his brother died in the same fire that had killed Alan. At the child who was all that remained of his family line. If I lose him, Nathan said to Shani, I lose everything. I know, Shani said. I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. Nathan nodded once. Then we'll provide the heirloom and the blood. Shani felt something in her chest loosen slightly. 3 families, 3 children, all consenting. Now she just had to make sure the ritual actually worked. The ceremony begins in 2 hours, she said. Gather at the crypt entrance with your heirlooms, bring the children, and prepare yourselves. What you're about to witness won't be comfortable. She walked out of the council chamber, leaving the families to process what they'd agreed to. In the corridor outside, Gregory caught up with her. That was well done, he said. That was desperate, Shani corrected. I have no idea if this ritual is going to work. But you're going to try anyway. Yes. Gregory walked beside her in silence for a moment. Then he said, the thing wearing Nathan's face. The construct. It's deteriorating faster than the others. Elisa says it has 12 hours at most. Shani's stomach dropped. That's not enough time. I need to do the other children's rituals first. Make sure the technique works. I know, Gregory said, but I needed you to know, so you can prioritize. They reached a junction in the corridor. Gregory stopped. Whatever happens, he said quietly, whether the rituals work or not, whether the children live or die, I want you to know that what you've done, what your grandmother did, it matters. It changed everything, and I'm sorry I didn't understand that before I burned the shrine. Shani looked at him. At the Alpha King who'd destroyed her life's work out of ignorance and was now trying to help her save it. Apologies are nice, she said. But they don't rebuild what was lost. No, Gregory agreed. They don't. But maybe we can build something better. Maybe, Shani said. Then she walked away, toward the crypt, toward 14 rituals that might save or kill everyone involved, toward a future that was completely uncertain. Behind her, Gregory watched her go, and wondered if he'd just made everything better or catastrophically worse. Chapter 5. The Crypt Decides. 28 hours remaining. The entrance to the royal crypt was a door that didn't look like much plain stone, unmarked except for a small wolf sigil carved into the lintel. No guards posted, no visible locks. Just a door at the end of a forgotten corridor in the oldest part of the castle. But when Shani touched it, she felt the wards immediately. Layers of protection magic woven over centuries, designed to keep the living out and the dead contained. The kind of magic that would kill an unauthorized person before they got 3 steps inside. You'll need clearance, Gregory said behind her. He held up a ring gold, ancient, with the Delaney wolf worked into the band. Alpha's seal. It grants temporary passage through the wards. He pressed the ring against the door. The stone rippled like water, and the wards peeled back with a sound like tearing fabric. The door opened. Cold air rushed out, not the natural cold of underground spaces, but something older. The cold that comes from being cut off from sunlight for 300 years. The cold of death accumulated and compressed into concentrated presence. Shani stepped through. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, carved directly into bedrock. No torches, no lighting. But as Shani's eyes adjusted, she realized the walls themselves were glowing faintly, a sickly green phosphorescence that came from something growing in the cracks between stones. Death moss, Bruce said from behind her. He'd arrived with Jonathan and Elsa, all 3 mages carrying bags of ritual materials. It feeds on necromantic energy. The fact that it's this thick means the death magic saturation down here is intense. They descended in silence. The spiral went down 5 levels, 5 complete rotations of stone stairs that seemed to go on forever. By the time they reached the bottom, Shani could feel the pressure of accumulated death magic pressing against her skin like physical weight. The crypt proper was a massive chamber carved from living rock. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls in neat rows, each one bearing a name, a date, a carved wolf. 300 years of Delaney alphas, laid to rest in order of succession. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, originally intended for ceremonial purposes, now covered in dust and time. That's our ritual space, Elsa said, pointing to the platform. We'll need to clear it, set up the containment circle, and establish the threshold anchors. How long? Shani asked. 3 hours if we work fast. You have 2. Elsa looked at her. That's not enough time to… Israel Crane has 4 hours before his binding fails completely, Shani interrupted. We need the ritual space ready before he arrives, or we lose him. 2 hours. Make it work. The mages spread out, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done ritual preparation hundreds of times. Jonathan began marking the containment circle using chalk made from ground bone and silver dust. Bruce positioned threshold anchors, small carved stones, that would help stabilize the boundary between life and death during the ritual. Elsa set up the measurement tools that would monitor the magical flow throughout the ceremony. Shani walked the perimeter of the chamber, studying the sarcophagi. Each one held a story. Each name represented a life lived, power wielded, decisions made that shaped the kingdom. Some of the alphas had ruled for decades, others for only a few years. One had ruled for 3 months before dying in battle. All of them were here now, reduced to names on stone. She stopped at one sarcophagus near the back. The inscription read, Marcus Delaney, Alpha, 1847 to 1889. He held the line. Not Marcus. Gregory had specifically said not to use that name, but the historical inscription was there regardless, and it made Shani wonder about the weight of carrying a bloodline forward, of being responsible for a name that stretched back centuries. Interesting choice, a voice said behind her. Shani turned. Raymond Bryant stood at the entrance to the chamber, looking pale and unsteady but conscious. His father, Tom, was beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder for support. Marcus Delaney, Raymond continued, walking closer to read the inscription. He's the reason blood magic got banned in the first place. Did you know that? No, Shani said. He had a daughter, Raymond said. Only child. She died of a blood disease when she was 15. Marcus tried to bring her back using forbidden magic. The ritual failed. The daughter didn't come back. Instead, something else came through the threshold. Something hungry. Raymond's eyes were distant, like he was reading from a history book he'd memorized. It took 3 other alphas working together to close the breach Marcus had opened. 47 people died before they contained it. After that, the council banned all blood magic involving resurrection. Death was declared a permanent threshold that couldn't be crossed. Anyone who tried would be executed. He looked at Shani. That's what you're doing here. Crossing a threshold that's been forbidden for 150 years. Doesn't that scare you? Yes, Shani said honestly. But watching children die because I'm too scared to act scares me more. Raymond studied her face. You really believe that? You're not doing this for power or recognition or control. You actually think you're saving lives. I know I'm saving lives, Shani corrected. I've done it 17 times. 18 if you count Nathan. 18 constructs, Raymond said quietly. 18 things that look like children but might not be fully human anymore. Have you thought about what that means long term? What happens when these children grow up, have families, pass down bloodlines that have been touched by death magic? I've thought about it, Shani said. I don't have answers. But I know that letting them die now doesn't solve the problem either. It just ends the question before we have a chance to find out. Raymond looked at the sarcophagus again. Marcus Delaney thought he was saving his daughter. Instead, he created a catastrophe. How do you know you're not doing the same thing? I don't, Shani said. But Marcus worked alone, in secret, without oversight or help. I'm doing this in front of witnesses, with documentation, with mages who can verify my work. If I'm making a mistake, at least it's one that can be studied and corrected. Or repeated, Raymond said. Before Shani could respond, Israel Crane arrived. He was being carried by 2 guards, unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. His skin had taken on a translucent quality, like he was fading, becoming less solid with each passing minute. His family followed his mother, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair, and his younger brother, barely 10 years old, looking terrified. "Is the ritual space ready?" Shawnee asked. "Ready enough," Bruce called from the platform. The containment circle was complete, the threshold anchors positioned, the measurement tools calibrated. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to work. "Bring him to the platform," Shawnee said. The guards laid Israel in the center of the containment circle. Shawnee knelt beside him, checking his pulse, his breathing, the color of his eyes now a shifting pattern of colors that meant his binding was unraveling rapidly. "We're down to 3 hours," Elisa said, reading the magical signature. "Maybe less." "Then we start now," Shawnee said. She looked at Israel's mother. "I need the family heirloom." The woman pulled a ring from her finger, old gold, worn smooth by generations of wear, set with a single dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Crane family signet," she said, "passed down from the first matriarch. 400 years of family magic invested in this ring." Shawnee took it carefully. She could feel the power in it, not flashy or dramatic, but deep and patient. The kind of power that came from centuries of continuous use by people who understood what they were doing. "And I need his consent," Shawnee said. "Verbal if he can give it. Physical sign if he can't." Israel's mother leaned down to her son. "Israel, can you hear me?" His eyes opened barely. The shifting colors had settled into a pale blue that didn't belong to any human bloodline. "The shrine keeper needs your permission to perform a binding ritual," his mother said. "It might save your life, or it might fail. She's being honest about the risks. Do you consent?" Israel's hand moved just slightly, fingers curling into a gesture that could have been a wave or a sign of agreement. "I'll take that as consent," Shawnee said. She turned to the mages. "Begin monitoring. Document everything. If something goes wrong, I need to know immediately so I can adjust." They took their positions around the containment circle, tools ready. Shawnee pulled out her grandmother's journal, opening to the page that described the original binding ritual. The instructions were detailed but written in a kind of shorthand that assumed the reader already understood the basics. Shawnee had spent 8 years learning to decode that shorthand. Now she had to apply it under pressure. "The ritual has 3 phases," she said, speaking for the benefit of the witnesses as much as for herself. "First, I establish connection with the failing binding and assess its current state. Second, I transfer the binding from the destroyed shrine to the personal anchor, in this case, the family ring. Third, I stabilize the new binding and ensure it can sustain itself without continuous external maintenance." She looked around the chamber. "This is blood magic. It requires my blood as the ritual caster, Israel's blood as the binding subject, and symbolic blood from the family heirloom to represent generational continuity. If anyone objects to witnessing this, leave now." No one moved. "Okay," Shawnee said. "Let's begin." She picked up the ritual knife, silver, consecrated, sharp enough to cut without pain. She cut her palm first, letting blood pool in her hand. Then she cut Israel's palm. He didn't react, too far gone to feel it, and let his blood mix with hers. The moment their blood touched, Shawnee felt the binding. It was like touching a rope that was unraveling, fibers coming apart strand by strand. She could feel where the shrine's anchor had been a strong, stable point that had suddenly vanished, leaving the binding with nothing to hold on to. She could also feel Israel himself, or what was left of him. The consciousness that had been pulled back from death 14 years ago and had been living, growing, learning ever since. He was still there, fragmented, fading, but present. "I need the ring," Shawnee said. Israel's mother placed it in her bloody palm. Shawnee pressed the ring against the mixed blood, letting it absorb the connection. Then she began the invocation words in a language that predated the kingdom. Words her grandmother had taught her phonetically without translation, because some magic worked better when you didn't fully understand what you were saying. The air in the chamber grew colder. The death moss on the walls began glowing brighter, and from the sarcophagi lining the chamber, Shani felt attention turning toward her. Not hostile, not helpful, just aware. The accumulated dead of House Delaney, noticing that someone was working magic in their resting place. Threshold energy is spiking, Jonathan said, reading his instruments. We're getting bleed through from the death side. Expected, Shani said, not stopping the invocation. The crypt is thin, that's why we're here. She took the blood-soaked ring and pressed it against Israel's chest, directly over his heart. Then she spoke the binding words, the part of the ritual that would transfer the anchor from shrine to object, from place to person. The ring began to glow, not with light exactly, more like heat made visible, a dark red radiance that pulsed in rhythm with Israel's heartbeat. Binding is transferring, Bruce said. I'm seeing the magical signature shift from external anchor to personal anchor. It's working. Shani felt the moment of transition the instant when the binding let go of the destroyed shrine and locked onto the ring instead. It was like watching a rope snap and catch a new anchor point, swinging wildly before stabilizing. Israel gasped. His eyes flew open brown now, fully brown, the correct color. What? He started. Don't move, Shani said. The binding is transferred but not stable yet. I need to reinforce it. She kept her hand pressed to his chest, feeling the rhythm of the binding as it adjusted to its new anchor. Too fast, and it would burn out. Too slow, and it would decay. She needed to find the right resonance, the right frequency that would let it sustain itself. Her grandmother's journal had called this part tuning the thread. It was more art than science, more intuition than formula. Shani closed her eyes and listened. The binding had a sound, not audible, but perceptible, like a hum at the edge of hearing. She followed it, adjusted her own magical output to match it, and slowly, carefully, helped it find its natural rhythm. Minutes passed. Israel's breathing steadied. His color improved. The translucent quality of his skin faded, replaced by normal human solidity. Binding is stabilizing, Elisa said. Magical signature is evening out. I think it's holding. Shani maintained the connection for another 5 minutes, making sure the binding had fully locked into place. Then, very carefully, she withdrew her hand. The ring continued glowing. The binding held. Israel sat up, looking confused and exhausted and alive. Did it work? He asked. Yes, Shani said. His mother made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. She rushed to her son, pulling him into an embrace that made him wince but didn't protest. Around the chamber, Shani heard whispers. The witnesses had seen it work, had watched a dying boy become stable again in less than an hour. That's one, Gregory said from the entrance. He'd been watching in silence the entire time. 13 more to go. Shani stood, her legs unsteady from the magical exertion. How long did that take? 47 minutes, Bruce said. Shani did the math. 13 more children, 47 minutes each. That was 10 hours and 21 minutes. Plus recovery time between rituals so she didn't collapse from magical exhaustion. They had 25 hours remaining before the next binding failed completely. It was going to be close. Send in the next child, Shani said. 18 hours remaining. Raymond Bryant was the 7th child. By the time he reached the platform, Shani had been working for 9 hours straight. 6 successful bindings. 6 children stabilized, given personal anchors, sent away with their families and instructions to return immediately if they felt the binding weakening. 6 families who had watched their children saved and were now looking at Shani with a mixture of gratitude and fear that made her deeply uncomfortable. Raymond was different from the others. He walked to the platform under his own power, no guards carrying him, no family supporting him. His father stayed back, watching from the shadows. When Raymond lay down in the containment circle, he looked at Shawnee with those fever-bright eyes and said, "I need to tell you something before we start." "Tell me after," Shawnee said. "We don't have time for—" "I'm the one who poisoned Nathan," Raymond said. The chamber went absolutely silent. Shawnee froze, ritual knife in hand. "What?" "3 months ago," Raymond said. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "I put the blood curse in his dinner. I knew what it would do. I knew it would force your hand, make you intervene publicly. I was trying to expose you." Gregory moved forward, his hand going to the sword at his hip. "You tried to kill my son." "I tried to kill a construct," Raymond corrected. "I knew Nathan wasn't real. I'd figured it out months before. The way he moved was wrong. The way he spoke sometimes used words he shouldn't know. I did research. Found old texts about binding magic. Realized what you'd done." He looked at Shawnee. "I thought if I could force you to save him again, publicly this time, people would see what you were. They'd understand that you were creating false heirs, corrupting noble bloodlines with death magic. I thought I was protecting the kingdom from a threat." "You didn't know you were one of the bound children," Shawnee said quietly. "No," Raymond said. "I found that out 3 hours ago, when I started showing symptoms. Luther told me. Showed me the records. Apparently I died when I was 9 and your grandmother brought me back. I don't remember it. Someone made me forget." "Your father," Shawnee said. "Tom didn't want you to know. He thought it would be easier if you believed you'd always been alive." Raymond laughed a bitter, hollow sound. "So I tried to expose the shrine keeper for corrupting noble bloodlines. And it turns out I'm one of the corrupted ones. That's almost funny." "It's ironic," Shani said. "Not funny." She looked at the ritual knife, looked at Raymond, looked at Gregory, who was still standing with his hand on his sword, looking like he wanted to run Raymond through. "I could let you die," Shawnee said. "You tried to kill Nathan. You're the reason the entire binding system is collapsing. I could walk away right now, and no one would blame me." "I know," Raymond said. "I'm asking you to save me anyway." "Why would I?" "Because I'm a kid," Raymond said simply. "I'm 17. I made a horrible decision based on incomplete information and self-righteous certainty that I understood something I didn't. If you let me die for that, you're saying that children don't deserve second chances when they make mistakes." Shawnee was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Gregory. "Your call. He tried to kill your son. If you want justice, I'll step aside." Gregory looked at Raymond, at the teenage boy who'd poisoned Nathan, who'd set in motion the chain of events that had destroyed the shrine and destabilized 14 bindings. "My son is already dead," Gregory said finally. "He died 3 months ago. What walks around in his body is something else. Punishing this boy won't bring Nathan back. It just creates another death." He stepped back. "Save him," Gregory said to Shawnee, "and then we'll deal with the consequences later." Raymond closed his eyes. "Thank you." Shawnee picked up the ritual knife. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because letting you die proves you right, that I'm the kind of person who values her pride over children's lives. I'm not giving you that satisfaction." She cut her palm, cut Raymond's palm, mixed their blood. The binding ritual began. This one was different. Raymond had been bound for 8 years, longer than most of the others. The binding was deeper, more integrated into his core self. Transferring it was like trying to separate 2 pieces of paper that had been glued together for years. You could do it, but there would be damage. Raymond gasped in pain as the binding shifted. "Hold on," Shawnee said. "This is going to hurt more than the others. Your binding is old. It doesn't want to move." "Just do it," Raymond ground out. Shawnee pushed harder, forcing the binding to release its grip on the destroyed shrine and lock onto the Bryant family heirloom, a silver pendant that Tom had provided with shaking hands. The transfer took longer. The binding fought her every step, creating resistance that made Shani's head throb and her hands shake. But eventually, it moved. The pendant began to glow, the binding locked into place. Raymond's breathing stabilized. "It's done," Shani said. She pulled her hand back and immediately collapsed. Elsa caught her before she hit the ground. "That's enough. You need to rest. There are 6 more children. Who can wait 3 hours while you recover?" Elsa said firmly. "You're no use to anyone if you pass out in the middle of a ritual." Shani wanted to argue, but her body was making it very clear that Elsa was right. She was shaking with exhaustion, her vision blurring at the edges, her magical reserves completely depleted. 3 hours, she agreed. "Then we continue." They helped her to a side chamber, a small room off the main crypt that had probably been used for preparation ceremonies. Someone brought food and water. Someone else brought blankets. Shani ate mechanically, drank until her hands stopped shaking, and then lay down intending to rest for just a few minutes. She was asleep before she finished the thought. 12 hours remaining. Shani woke to someone shaking her shoulder. "You need to see this," Jonathan said. His voice was urgent. She sat up, disoriented. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's. Come look." She followed him back to the main chamber. The remaining 6 children were there, the ones who still needed binding rituals. But they weren't showing symptoms anymore. Their eyes were the right colors. Their skin was solid. Their breathing was normal. "What happened?" Shani asked. "We think it's the crypt itself," Bruce said. He was reading his instruments with an expression of complete bafflement. "The concentration of death magic down here is so intense that it's stabilizing the failing bindings. Not permanently, the effect will wear off as soon as they leave, but it's buying us time." "How much time?" "Hard to say. Maybe 12 hours. Maybe more." Shani looked at the children. At the temporary reprieve they'd been given. "Then we use it," she said. "We do the remaining bindings now, while they're stable enough to handle the ritual safely." The next 6 rituals went faster. With the children stable instead of actively dying, the bindings transferred more smoothly. The personal anchors locked into place with less resistance. Mindy Blevins. Anchor. Richardson family bracelet. 42 minutes. Alan Gill. Anchor. Bowen family compass. 38 minutes. Carla Cobb. Anchor. Landry family knife. 45 minutes. Justin Kane. Anchor. Moyer family seal. 39 minutes. Christina Kelly. Anchor. Crane family journal. 41 minutes. And finally, Nathan. Or the construct that looked like Nathan. Gregory carried him to the platform personally. The thing wasn't unconscious, but it wasn't fully present either. Its eyes were that wrong blue color, and when it looked at Shani, the expression was too knowing, too old for an 8-year-old. "This is going to be different," Shani said to Gregory. "Nathan isn't like the others. He's a full construct. The binding isn't maintaining a restored soul, it's holding together a created consciousness. I don't know if the transfer will work the same way." "But you'll try," Gregory said. "Yes." Gregory placed the Delaney family ring in Shani's hand, the same ring he'd used to pass through the crypt wards. "This has held alpha power for 300 years. If any object can anchor my son, it's this one." Shani took the ring. She performed the ritual exactly as she had for the others. Blood mixed. Invocation spoken. Ring pressed to the construct's chest. But when she tried to transfer the binding, it wouldn't move. The construct's binding wasn't anchored to the destroyed shrine. It was anchored to Shani herself, to the 7 years of her life she'd traded, to the blood she'd given during the original ritual. Moving it would require breaking that personal connection. "It's not working," Elisa said, watching the magical readings. "The binding is locked to you. Transferring it to an object would require severing your connection completely." "Then I sever it," Shani said. "That will kill you," Jonathan said. 7 years of your life are invested in that binding. Cutting the connection will take those years back all at once. Your body won't survive that kind of sudden aging. Shawnee looked at the construct. At the thing that had Nathan's face and Nathan's voice and 3 months of Nathan's memories. Is there another way? Gregory asked. Yes, Bruce said slowly, but you won't like it. Tell me. Instead of transferring the binding to an object, we transfer it to a person. Someone who's willing to take Shawnee's place as the anchor. Someone who can sustain the construct through their own life force. Everyone looked at Gregory. You want me to become the anchor, he said. You're his father, Bruce said. Biologically, magically, in every way that matters. If anyone can sustain a binding to Nathan, it's you. What would that cost me? Gregory asked. Years, Shawnee said. Same as what I paid. 7 years of your life, transferred to the construct. You'd age normally otherwise, but those 7 years would be gone, spent maintaining him. Gregory looked at the thing on the platform, at the construct that wasn't his son but was the closest thing he had. Will he be able to grow up? Gregory asked. Live a normal life? Defining normal is complicated, Shawnee said. But yes, he'll age, learn, develop. The binding will sustain him. He just won't be able to produce heirs. The bloodline ends with him. And with me, Gregory said. If I'm spending 7 years keeping him alive, I won't have time to father another heir. No, Shawnee agreed. You won't. Gregory was quiet for a long time. Then he said, do it. Shawnee modified the ritual. Instead of transferring the binding to the ring, she transferred it from herself to Gregory. It required both their blood, both their consent, and a level of magical intimacy that made Gregory's hands shake when Shawnee cut his palm. The binding moved slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to leave Shawnee, but eventually, it locked onto Gregory instead. The construct gasped. Its eyes shifted blue to brown, wrong color to right color. Dad, it said in Nathan's voice. Gregory pulled the construct into an embrace, and for the first time since entering the crypt, his expression cracked. I've got you. I feel different, the construct said. More solid. You're anchored to me now, Gregory said. You're my responsibility, my son, in every way that matters. The construct, Nathan held onto his father and didn't let go. Shawnee stepped back, feeling lighter. The weight of Nathan's binding, the 7 years she'd been carrying, was gone, transferred to someone else. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt a strange sense of loss. That's all of them, Elisa said, checking the last measurement. 14 children, 14 successful bindings, all stable. The families began gathering their children, preparing to leave the crypt. There were murmurs of gratitude, cautious thanks, and more than a few suspicious looks that suggested the fear hadn't entirely disappeared. Shawnee sat on the edge of the platform, watching them go. Luther approached her quietly. You did it. Against impossible odds, in less than a day, you saved them all. For now, Shawnee said. The personal anchors will last years, but they're not permanent. Eventually, we'll need to find a real solution. Then we find one, Luther said. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, you won the battle. Shawnee looked around the empty crypt, at the death moss still glowing on the walls, at the sarcophagi of dead alphas watching in eternal silence. I won a battle, she agreed, but the war is just starting. What do you mean? Shawnee stood. Raymond tried to kill Nathan to expose me. He knew I was creating constructs, knew I was binding children to unnatural life. He thought I was corrupting the noble bloodlines. He was wrong. Was he? Shawnee asked. I've been doing exactly what he accused me of. Bringing back children from death, binding them to magic that's been forbidden for 150 years. Creating a system where noble families are dependent on blood magic to maintain their heirs. Raymond was wrong about his methods, but he wasn't wrong about what I am. Luther was quiet. You're a healer, he said finally. That's what you are. I'm a necromancer, Shawnee corrected. Using socially acceptable language doesn't change what I do. And now that 14 families know exactly what I am, how long do you think it takes before someone decides I'm too dangerous to leave alive? Gregory won't let that happen. Gregory is one man, Shawnee said, and he just spent 7 years of his life to save a construct. That makes him vulnerable. Compromised. The moment someone wants to challenge his authority, they'll use me as the weapon, the necromancer he's protecting, the blood mage he's allowing to corrupt the kingdom. She looked at Luther directly. I need protection that doesn't depend on one person's goodwill. I need institutional power, legal recognition, a position that makes me too valuable to eliminate. What are you asking for? I'm asking you to help me establish the Shrine Keepers as an official magical order, Shawnee said, with legal authority, royal recognition, and enough political power that attacking us means attacking an institution, not just a person. Luther considered this. That will require council approval, probably a formal charter. Definitely opposition from the traditionalists who still believe blood magic should be banned. I know, Shawnee said, but I just saved 14 noble heirs. Right now I have leverage I've never had before. If we're going to do this, we do it now while gratitude is fresh and fear is strong. Luther smiled slightly. You're learning politics. I'm learning survival, Shawnee corrected. Same thing, Luther said. I'll draft the charter proposal. We'll present it to the council tomorrow. Thank you. Luther nodded and walked away, leaving Shawnee alone in the crypt with only the dead for company. She stood there for a long time, looking at the empty containment circle where 14 children had been saved, wondering if she'd just traded one form of invisibility for another, wondering if institutional power would protect her or just make her a more visible target, wondering if her grandmother had chosen to remain invisible precisely because she understood what happened to people who became too important to ignore. The death moss glowed on the walls. The dead alphas watched in silence, and Shawnee walked out of the crypt alone, toward whatever came next. Chapter 6. The Boy Who Chose Darkness. 48 hours after the crypt. The council chamber had never been this full. All 7 great house representatives sat in their designated seats. Behind them, family members crowded the available space parents whose children had been saved, nobles who wanted to witness history, merchants who'd somehow secured invitations to watch power shift in real time. Gregory sat on the golden wolf throne, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 days, which, Shawnee reflected, he essentially had. The binding to Nathan was stable, but costly. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair that hadn't been there before. Nathan himself stood beside the throne, looking healthier than he had any right to. The construct had settled into its new anchor completely, and whatever wrongness had clung to it in the early days had faded. He looked like a normal 8-year-old boy, almost. Shawnee stood in the center of the chamber, exactly where she'd stood 3 days ago when they'd interrogated her about Nathan's recovery. But everything was different now. Then, she'd been a suspect, a potential threat. Now, she was something else entirely. Luther stood beside her, holding a document bound in leather, the official charter proposal they'd spent the last 2 days drafting. Behind them, the 3 royal mages who'd helped with the crypt rituals stood as witnesses and advisors. And scattered throughout the crowd, wearing simple black clothing that marked them as different from the nobility, stood 12 people Shawnee had never met. Shrine keepers, hedge practitioners, wild mages, people who'd been practicing healing magic outside official channels for decades, who'd heard what happened in the crypt and had traveled to the capital to see if the rumors were true, to see if one of their own was actually being offered legitimacy. Gregory called the chamber to order with a single gesture. 3 days ago, he said, his voice carrying through the crowded space, my son was dying. 14 other noble heirs were dying. The royal physicians had no answers. The healing wards had no solutions. We were looking at the collapse of multiple bloodlines and the destabilization of the entire noble hierarchy. He paused. One person prevented that catastrophe. Shawnee, step forward. Shawnee walked closer to the throne. Gregory looked at her directly. You saved my son. You saved 14 children who would have died without your intervention. You did this using methods that are technically illegal, employing magic that has been forbidden for over a century, and operating outside any recognized institutional framework. The crowd murmured. This presents us with a problem, Gregory continued. We can acknowledge that you saved lives and continue to treat you as a criminal operating in the shadows. Or we can recognize that the current magical institutional framework is incomplete, that it excludes practices and practitioners who are providing vital services, and that it's time to expand what we consider legitimate magic. He gestured to Luther. Master Ellison has prepared a formal proposal. I'm asking this council to hear it, debate it, and make a decision that will shape how this kingdom approaches healing magic for generations to come. Luther stepped forward and began reading. Proposal for the establishment of the Order of Shrine Keepers as a recognized magical institution within the kingdom. His voice was steady, precise, the voice of a man who'd spent 40 years making official records sound authoritative. Whereas traditional healing magic as practiced through official channels has proven insufficient to address certain conditions affecting noble bloodlines, and whereas alternative healing practices performed by shrine keepers have demonstrated effectiveness in cases where conventional methods have failed, and whereas the current legal framework criminalizes these alternative practices despite their demonstrated value, therefore, be it resolved that. He went through the formal language, the legal structures, the proposed oversight mechanisms, but the core of it was simple. Recognize shrine keeping as legitimate magical practice. Establish legal protections for practitioners. Create institutional framework for training and oversight. Grant shrine keepers authority to practice healing magic without fear of prosecution. When Luther finished reading, the chamber was silent. Then Jaime Richardson stood. I have questions, she said. Her voice was sharp, controlled. This proposal grants extraordinary power to a group of practitioners who have been operating in secret, outside any oversight, for decades. How do we know they won't abuse that power? The same way we trust any magical order not to abuse power, Luther said. Through oversight, documentation, and accountability. The Charter includes provisions for regular review, mandatory reporting of interventions, and council authority to revoke recognition if standards aren't met. That's not enough, Jaime said. These practitioners use blood magic, death threshold magic, techniques that were banned specifically because they're dangerous. You're asking us to legitimize something our ancestors deemed too risky to allow. Our ancestors, Shawnee said quietly, banned blood magic after one catastrophic incident performed by one reckless alpha who worked alone and ignored every safety protocol. They threw out an entire category of magical practice because one person used it badly. She looked around the chamber. I'm not asking you to approve reckless magic. I'm asking you to distinguish between blood magic performed carelessly and blood magic performed with proper knowledge, safety measures, and ethical frameworks. The shrine keepers who came to this chamber today have been working for decades without causing catastrophes. That should tell you something about our competence. Or your luck, Tom Moyer said. He stood slowly, his expression grim. My son is alive because of you. I'm grateful, but I'm also terrified. You brought him back from death using magic I don't understand, binding him to an anchor that could fail, creating a life that's dependent on continuous magical intervention. How is that different from creating a slave to magic? Shawnee had been expecting this question. She'd prepared for it. Your son has agency, she said. He makes choices. He grows, learns, develops as a person. The binding sustains his life, but it doesn't control his will. That's the critical distinction. We're not creating puppets. We're maintaining lives that would otherwise end. For now, Tom said. But what happens when these children grow up? When they have children of their own? What happens to bloodlines that have been touched by death magic? We don't know, Shani said honestly. We won't know until it happens, but I can tell you what we do know. Children who would have died are alive. They're living full lives. They're contributing to their families and communities. Maybe their bloodlines will be different. Maybe their children will carry some echo of the death magic. Or maybe they'll be completely normal. We won't find out by letting them die now. That's asking us to experiment on noble bloodlines, Jamie said. You're already experimenting. Bruce Landry spoke up from where he'd been standing quietly. Every time you marry someone to strengthen political alliances, every time you use bloodline magic to enhance certain traits, every time you choose one heir over another based on magical potential, you're experimenting. You're just not calling it that. He looked at Jaime directly. The only difference is that when official institutions experiment with bloodlines, we call it strategic marriage policy or bloodline optimization. When shrine keepers do the same work, you call it corruption. The magic isn't different, just the people performing it. That landed hard. Christina Williams stood. She'd been quiet through most of the debate, but now she looked at Shani with an expression that was difficult to read. 23 years ago, she said, I was dying. A shrine keeper saved my life. I didn't know the details of how she did it. I didn't ask. I was grateful to be alive and I moved forward without looking back. She paused. Now I'm being asked to vote on whether to legitimize the practice that saved me. And I find myself wondering, if I'd known the details back then, if someone had explained that the shrine keeper was using blood magic and death threshold techniques, would I have consented? Or would I have chosen to die rather than be saved through unnatural means? The chamber was absolutely quiet. I think, Christina said slowly, I would have consented because I wanted to live, because I trusted that the shrine keeper knew what she was doing, and because the alternative was death, and death doesn't leave room for philosophical debates about the purity of magical methods. She looked at the council members. These 14 children didn't ask to die. They didn't choose to need magical intervention. They were put in impossible situations, and someone offered them a way to survive. We can argue about whether the methods were appropriate, whether the magic was too dangerous, whether we're setting bad precedents. But at the end of the day, 14 children are alive who would otherwise be dead. That has to count for something. Tomas Landry stood next. My daughter is 10 years old. She's alive because a shrine keeper my brother found was willing to break the law to save her. I don't understand the magic. I don't like that I'm dependent on it. But I'm voting yes on this charter because the alternative is telling my daughter that her life isn't legitimate, that she shouldn't exist, that the magic keeping her alive is shameful. He looked at his daughter standing in the crowd. I won't do that to her, he said. I won't tell any of these children that their survival is a mistake. One by one, other parents stood. Israel Crane's mother. Yes. Raymond Bryan's father. Yes. Mindy Blevins' parents. Yes. The votes came faster. Not all of them. Some families stayed silent. Some representatives looked uncertain. But momentum was building. Nathan Bowen stood last. He'd been the most resistant in the beginning, the hardest to convince to participate in the crypt rituals. I vote yes, he said. Not because I trust shrine keepers, not because I like blood magic, but because my nephew is alive and I'm not willing to criminalize the practice that saved him just to make myself feel better about traditional magical boundaries. Gregory looked around the chamber. All in favor of recognizing the Order of Shrine Keepers as a legitimate magical institution, raise your hands. Hands went up. Not all of them. Maybe 2/3 of the council. But it was enough. The motion passes, Gregory said. The Order of Shrine Keepers is hereby recognized as an official magical institution with full legal authority to practice healing magic within this kingdom. The chamber erupted. Half the crowd was cheering. The other half looked like they wanted to protest but weren't sure how to argue with parents whose children had just been saved. Gregory let it go for 30 seconds, then raised his hand for silence. "There are conditions," he said. "The Shrine Keepers will operate under council oversight. They will document all interventions. They will submit to regular reviews of their practices. And they will establish training protocols to ensure future practitioners meet appropriate standards." He looked at Shawnee. "You'll serve as the founding director of the order. You'll report directly to the council, and you'll be responsible for ensuring that the practices you legitimize today don't become the catastrophes we fear tomorrow." Shawnee felt the weight of that responsibility settle over her shoulders like a physical presence. "I accept," she said. "Then it's done," Gregory said. "This council session is concluded." People began filing out, still arguing, still debating, but the decision was made, official, irrevocable. Shawnee stood in the center of the chamber as the crowd dispersed, feeling strangely disconnected from what had just happened. She'd won. The Shrine Keepers were legitimate now, protected, recognized. So why did it feel like she'd just locked herself into a cage? 1 week later, the new shrine was nothing like the old one. For one thing, it was inside the castle grounds, a walled garden on the eastern side of the complex, visible from the council chambers, accessible to anyone who needed it. No more hiding on the border. No more invisibility. For another, it was bigger. Triple the size of her grandmother's shrine, with space for multiple practitioners to work simultaneously, training grounds for new shrine keepers, a library for documenting techniques, meeting rooms for the council oversight committee that would be watching everything she did. It was official, institutional, legitimate. It was also completely unlike the space where Shawnee had learned her craft. She stood in the center of the new garden, looking at the neat rows of planting beds, the organized herb classifications, the stone altar that had been carved by professional masons instead of worn smooth by generations of hands. "It's different," a voice said behind her. Shawnee turned. One of the shrine keepers who'd come to the capital stood at the garden entrance, an older woman with silver hair and hands that were stained with plant matter in ways that spoke of decades of work. "I'm Dolores Jackson," the woman said. "I've been running a shrine in the Southern Territories for 30 years. Heard what you did here and thought I should see it for myself." "What do you think?" Shawnee asked. Dolores looked around the garden. "I think you've traded one kind of invisibility for another. Before, you were invisible because no one acknowledged what you did. Now you're invisible because you've been absorbed into the official structure. You're legitimate, but you're also controlled." "That was the price of recognition," Shawnee said. "Was it worth it?" Shawnee didn't answer immediately. Over the past week, she'd established training protocols, documented her grandmother's techniques, met with the oversight committee, interviewed potential shrine keeper candidates, done everything required of a founding director of an official magical order. She'd also been watched constantly. Guards at the garden entrance, council observers taking notes during training sessions, formal reports required for every healing intervention. She was protected. She was also trapped. "I don't know yet," Shawnee said finally. "Ask me in a year." Dolores smiled slightly. "That's an honest answer. Most people in your position would try to sell me on how great official recognition is. Most people in my position haven't spent their entire lives working outside official structures," Shawnee said. "I know what we've gained. I also know what we've lost." "What have we lost?" Shawnee looked at the organized garden, at the official shrine that looked nothing like her grandmother's wild, chaotic, sacred space. "Freedom," she said. "The freedom to work without oversight. The freedom to make decisions based on need rather than policy. The freedom to say no when someone demands we use our magic for purposes we don't agree with. Can you still say no? Dolores asked. Now that you're official? I don't know, Shawnee admitted. We haven't tested that yet. But I suspect the first time I refuse a request from a powerful, noble family, we'll find out exactly how much freedom we actually have. Dolores was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your grandmother worked alone for 40 years. She saved 17 lives and died with no recognition, no protection, nothing but a journal that only you could read. You've taken that work and made it sustainable, made it something that can continue after you're gone. That matters, even if it comes with constraints. Does it? Shani asked. Or did I just trade my grandmother's invisibility for a more socially acceptable form of control? Both things can be true, Dolores said. You can be legitimized and controlled at the same time. The question is whether the legitimization buys you enough power to push back against the control when it matters. She looked at Shani directly. Your grandmother couldn't push back. She had to accept whatever the noble families demanded because she had no institutional support, no legal protection. You have those things now. Maybe you'll use them to create space for the next generation to have more freedom than either of you had. Or maybe you'll discover that official recognition just means a prettier cage. You're not selling this very well, Shani said. Dolores laughed. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you've signed up for. Because, in about 6 months, when some powerful family demands you perform a binding you're not comfortable with, you're going to have to decide whether to use your institutional authority to refuse or whether to comply to maintain your legitimacy. That's the test of whether this new order actually has power or just the appearance of it. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Dolores said, I think you did the right thing. Your grandmother's approach was sustainable for 1 generation, maybe 2 if you'd been willing to live exactly the way she did. But it wasn't scalable. It couldn't grow. You've created something that can grow. Whether it grows in the right direction is up to you. She walked away, leaving Shani alone in the official shrine that felt nothing like home. 3 months later, the test came sooner than 6 months. Carlton Strickland, the House Bryant heir who'd been saved 9 years ago, had grown into a teenager with political ambitions that made his family nervous and the council wary. He was smart, charismatic, and deeply resentful of the fact that his life was dependent on a magical binding he'd had no say in. When he turned 17, he came to Shani with a request. I want you to remove the binding, he said. They were in one of the private consultation rooms in the new shrine spaces designed for confidential conversations between shrine keepers and clients. The rooms were supposed to be secure, but Shani had found listening spells in the walls twice already. She'd removed them. They kept coming back. Removing the binding would kill you, Shani said carefully. I know, Carlton said. I've done the research. Read the texts. Consulted with 3 independent mages. They all say the same thing. The binding is what's keeping me alive. Remove it, I die. Then why are you asking? Carlton leaned forward. Because living with this thing in my chest, knowing that every day of my life is artificial, that I'm only alive because someone decided to play God with death magic that's not living, that's existing, and I'm tired of existing. Shani studied his face. He meant it. This wasn't a dramatic gesture or a cry for attention. This was a young man who decided he'd rather die on his own terms than live on someone else's magical intervention. Have you talked to your family? She asked. They don't get a vote, Carlton said. This is my life. Or my death. My choice. Legally, you're still a minor. Legally, I shouldn't exist, Carlton interrupted. I died 9 years ago. Everything since then has been borrowed time. I'm giving it back. Shani was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, If I remove your binding, I'll be investigated. The council will want to know why. Your family will demand answers. This will become a test case for whether shrine keepers have the authority to end interventions or only to begin them. I know. It could destabilize the entire order. We've been official for 3 months. This could end that. I know that too, Carlton said. And I'm sorry, but I'm still asking. Shani looked at the young man in front of her, at the heir who'd been saved as a child and had grown up knowing he was only alive because of magic he didn't understand and couldn't control. She thought about her grandmother. About 40 years of saving lives without question, without considering whether the people she saved wanted to be saved. She thought about consent, about autonomy, about the difference between saving someone's life and forcing them to live. I need 24 hours, she said, to prepare, to document, to make sure that if I do this, there's a record of why. Does that mean you'll do it? Carlton asked. It means I'm considering it, Shani said. Come back tomorrow, same time, and bring a written statement of your wishes. Signed, witnessed. Something that makes it clear this is your choice, not mine. Carlton stood. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Shani said. I haven't decided. He left. Shani sat in the consultation room for a long time after he was gone. Then she went to find Gregory. The Alpha King was in his private study, working through administrative documents with the kind of focused exhaustion that suggested he'd been at it for hours. Nathan the construct was sitting near the window, reading a book that looked far too advanced for an 8-year-old. But then, he wasn't really 8. He was 3 months old and carrying 8 years of Nathan Delaney's memories. The reading level made sense when you thought about it that way. Gregory looked up when Shani entered. This is either very good news or very bad news. Bad, Shani said. Carlton Strickland wants me to remove his binding. Gregory set down his pen very carefully. He wants to die. He wants autonomy, Shani corrected. He's 17. Old enough to understand what the binding is, what it costs, what it means. And he's decided he doesn't want to live as a magical construct anymore. Can you talk him out of it? I could try, Shani said. But should I? He's making an informed decision about his own life. Who am I to tell him he's wrong? You're the person who saved him, Gregory said. 9 years ago, when he was 8 years old and dying, you gave him 9 extra years. Doesn't that mean something? It means I made a decision for him when he was too young to make it himself, Shani said. Now he's old enough, and he's making a different choice. Gregory stood and walked to the window. Nathan looked up from his book but didn't say anything. If you remove that binding, Gregory said, you'll be setting a precedent. Every bound child who decides they don't want to live with the magic anymore will have legal grounds to demand removal. We could lose all of them. We could, Shani agreed. Or we could establish that shrine keepers respect autonomy, that we save lives when we can, but we don't force people to accept salvation they don't want. That's a philosophical position, Gregory said, not a practical one. It's both, Shani said. Practically, forcing Carlton to stay alive against his will makes him a prisoner of my magic. Philosophically, that's exactly the kind of abuse everyone was afraid of when we established the order. If I refuse to let him die, I prove that shrine keepers do control people through magic, that we're exactly as dangerous as the traditionalists warned. Gregory turned to face her. And if you let him die? Then I prove that shrine keepers value consent over control, Shani said. That we're not trying to build power through creating dependence. That we respect the people we save enough to let them make their own choices, even if those choices lead to death. Especially if those choices lead to death, Shani said. Death is the one thing we can't control. Making peace with that is part of the work. Gregory was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, this is going to destroy your political capital. The families who supported the order did it because you were saving children. If you start killing them instead. I'm not killing anyone, Shani interrupted. I'm honoring a request from someone who has the right to make that request. There's a difference. The families won't see it that way. Then the families will need to decide what they actually want from shrine keepers, Shani said. Do they want practitioners who save lives and respect autonomy? Or do they want magical servants who perform interventions on demand, without questioning whether those interventions are ethical? She looked at Gregory directly. You made me the founding director because you thought I'd build something sustainable, something that could last beyond one generation. That means establishing principles that matter more than short-term political convenience. And the most important principle is this: we don't own the people we save. We don't control them. We don't trap them in lives they don't want just because we have the power to keep them alive. Nathan spoke up from the window. She's right. Gregory looked at the construct. You don't get a vote in this. I know, Nathan said, but I still think she's right. If Carlton wants to die and you force him to keep living, then he's not really alive. He's just a body being maintained against his will. That's not what shrine keepers are supposed to do. You're 8 years old, Gregory said. You don't understand. I'm 3 months old, Nathan corrected quietly. And I understand exactly what Carlton is feeling, because every day I wake up knowing I'm not real, that I'm something someone made to fill a hole left by a dead child. It's not the same as what Carlton is experiencing, but it's close enough that I understand why he'd rather die than keep pretending. The room went very quiet. Gregory looked at the construct that had his son's face, at the thing he'd invested 7 years of his life to save. Do you want me to remove your binding? Shawnee asked Nathan gently. Nathan thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, No, I want to stay. But I want it to be my choice, not something forced on me. That's the difference. He looked at Gregory. If you tell Shawnee she can't honor Carlton's request, you're telling me that my choice doesn't matter either, that you'll keep me alive whether I want it or not, and that's scary. Gregory sat down heavily. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Shawnee said. But we figure it out together, or we fail separately. Those are the options. Gregory was quiet for a long time. Then he said, If you remove Carlton's binding, you document everything. You get written consent from him, witnessed by at least 3 people who aren't shrine keepers. You submit a formal report to the council explaining your reasoning, and you accept whatever political consequences come from that decision. I will, Shawnee said. And you do it knowing that this might be the thing that destroys the order before it's even established, Gregory added. You do it knowing that you might lose everything you've built. I know, Shawnee said. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. My grandmother saved 17 lives over 40 years, she said. She never asked if they wanted to be saved. She just did it because she could. I think that was a mistake. I think the work we do is only meaningful if the people we're helping actually want our help. She left. Gregory sat in his study with Nathan, both of them quiet. Did I say the right thing? Nathan asked after a while. I don't know, Gregory said, but you said what you believed. That's what matters. Do you think she's going to do it? Remove Carlton's binding? Yes, Gregory said. I think she is. Are you scared? Gregory looked at the construct that called him father, that depended on him for life, that was real enough to question its own existence. Terrified, he admitted. Nathan nodded and went back to his book, and Gregory sat with the knowledge that the order he'd helped establish might not survive its first real moral test. The next day, Carlton returned with the written statement. Shawnee read it carefully. 3 pages, handwritten, explaining his reasoning, his understanding of the consequences, his clear request that the binding be removed. Witnessed by Luther, Bruce, and Tom, 3 people who had no connection to Carlton's family, who had no reason to coerce him into this decision. It was legitimate. It was also heartbreaking. You're sure? Shawnee asked one last time. I'm sure, Carlton said. Then we do it now, Shawnee said. In the official shrine, with witnesses present, everything documented. They gathered in the main garden. The council oversight committee was there, 6 members who'd been assigned to monitor shrine keeper activities. Carlton's family was there, looking devastated but silent. Gregory was there, representing official sanction. And Dolores was there, the visiting shrine keeper who'd warned Shani this test was coming. Shani explained the procedure, the ritual that would sever the binding, the expected timeline, the fact that Carlton would likely lose consciousness within minutes and die within the hour. Carlton lay down on the stone altar. "Any last words?" Shani asked. "Thank you," Carlton said. "For giving me 9 years I wouldn't have had, and for respecting me enough to let me choose how they end." Shani began the ritual. It was simpler than the binding rituals. No blood transfer, no anchor objects, just a careful severing of the magical connections that had been holding Carlton together since he was 8. The binding resisted. It had been in place for 9 years. It didn't want to let go, but Shani was stronger now than she'd been when her grandmother's techniques were all she had. She'd learned from 3 royal mages. She'd performed 14 complex bindings under pressure. She'd established an entire magical order. She knew what she was doing. The binding severed cleanly. Carlton gasped once. His eyes went distant, and 5 minutes later, he stopped breathing. The garden was absolutely silent. Shani stood over the altar, feeling the weight of what she'd just done. She'd killed someone. No, she'd honored someone's choice to die. The distinction felt important, even as it felt inadequate. Carlton's mother made a sound that might have been a sob. His father led her away from the altar, supporting her weight. The oversight committee members were making notes, documenting, recording. Gregory stood watching, his expression unreadable. And Dolores walked over to Shani and placed a hand on her shoulder. That, she said quietly, was the right choice. It was also the hardest choice. Welcome to leadership. Shani looked at the body on the altar, at the young man who'd chosen death over continued magical existence. "This is going to destroy the order," she said. "Maybe," Dolores said. "Or maybe it establishes the order as something worth preserving. Time will tell." The council committee chairman approached. "We'll need your full report by tomorrow." "You'll have it," Shani said. He left. The witnesses dispersed. Eventually, only Shani and Gregory remained. "That was brave," Gregory said finally. "That was necessary," Shani corrected. "Bravery implies I had a choice." "You did have a choice. You chose to honor his autonomy over political safety. Because that's what makes the work meaningful," Shani said. "If we only save people who can't refuse our help, we're not healers, we're jailers." Gregory nodded slowly. "The council will debate this for months. Some members will call for your removal. Others will defend you. It's going to be chaos." "I know. Was it worth it?" Shani looked at the empty altar, thought about Carlton's gratitude, thought about Nathan's fear of being kept alive against his will, thought about her grandmother, who'd saved 17 lives without ever asking if they wanted to be saved. "Ask me in a year," she said. It was becoming her standard answer. Maybe someday she'd have a better one. 6 months later, the order survived. Barely. The council debated Carlton's death for 3 months. Some representatives called for Shani's immediate removal. Others defended her decision. The families were split. But ultimately, the order's charter included provisions for client autonomy in medical decisions, and Carlton's written consent was unambiguous. The decision stood. The precedent was set, and slowly, carefully, the order began to grow. Dolores established a southern branch. 2 other shrine keepers opened practices in the Western Territories. Training programs were developed. Standards were established. The shrine keepers were becoming an institution. Shani stood in the official garden on a cold morning, watching new trainees practice basic binding techniques on plants. It was preliminary work learning to sense magical connections, to manipulate life force without damaging the recipient. None of them would be ready to work with people for years, but they were learning. The tradition was continuing. Nathan approached, now looking closer to 9 than 8. The construct aged slowly, but it did age. Another year, and he'd look 10. Eventually, he'd look like a teenager. Eventually, Gregory would die, and the binding would need a new anchor. They'd deal with that when it came. "There's someone here to see you," Nathan said. "Who?" She didn't give a name, just said she knew your grandmother. Shani felt something cold settle in her stomach. She walked to the garden entrance. An old woman stood there, leaning on a carved staff that looked older than the kingdom. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and when she looked at Shani, there was recognition in them. "You look like her," the woman said. "Your grandmother. Same eyes, same stubborn, set to your jaw." "Did you know her?" Shani asked. "I trained her," the woman said. 60 years ago, when she was 20 and thought she could save the world. I taught her the binding techniques, the threshold navigation, the blood sacrifice protocols. She looked past Shani at the official garden. "She took what I taught her and built something remarkable," the woman continued. "Worked alone for 40 years, saved 17 lives, died with nothing but a journal to show for it. And now you've taken that journal and turned it into this." She gestured at the garden, the trainees, the institutional structure. "Is that admiration or criticism?" Shani asked. "Both," the woman said. "Your grandmother chose invisibility because she understood that the moment shrine keepers became visible, they'd become targets. You've made us visible, legitimate, official. That's either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, and I haven't decided which yet." "I'm still figuring that out myself," Shani admitted. The woman smiled. "Good. The moment you think you have all the answers is the moment you stop being useful." She turned to leave, then paused. "Your grandmother used to say that the hardest part of the work isn't saving lives. It's living with the ones you can't save, the ones who don't want to be saved, and the ones who survive but resent you for it." She looked at Shani directly. "You're learning that now. Faster than she did, maybe. That's good. Means you might actually survive this role long enough to pass it on to someone else." "Who are you?" Shani asked. "Someone who's been doing this work longer than your grandmother, longer than you, longer than this kingdom has had official magical institutions," the woman said. "Someone who's watching to see if what you've built becomes something worth preserving, or just another power structure that forgets why it exists." She walked away, leaning on her staff, disappearing into the morning crowds. Shani stood at the garden entrance, watching her go. Behind her, trainees practiced binding techniques. In the castle, Gregory maintained Nathan's anchor. In council chambers, representatives debated shrinekeeper oversight. In territories across the kingdom, people who needed healing were learning they had options beyond royal physicians and official healing wards. The system was changing, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and resistance, and moments when Shani wondered if her grandmother's approach had been wiser after all. But it was changing, and maybe that was enough. 1 year later, the anniversary of the Order's founding was marked with an official ceremony. Gregory gave a speech about innovation in magical practice. Council members congratulated themselves on forward-thinking policy. Families whose children had been saved thanked the shrine keepers publicly. It was political theater, carefully orchestrated to present the Order as an unqualified success. Shani stood through it with practiced patience, saying the right things, accepting the recognition, playing the role of founding director with appropriate gravitas. But when the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, she walked back to the garden alone. Nathan found her there an hour later, sitting on the stone altar where Carlton had died. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Shani said honestly. "Ask me in a year." Nathan smiled. He'd heard that answer enough times to recognize it as her standard deflection. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Making the Order official?" Shani thought about the question seriously. She thought about the children who'd been saved, about the trainees learning techniques that would otherwise be lost, about the shrine keepers across the kingdom who could now work openly without fear of prosecution. She thought about Carlton, about the oversight committees, about the political calculations that went into every decision now. She thought about her grandmother, working alone for 40 years, invisible and unrecognized but completely free. "I regret that I'll never know what my grandmother would have done," she said finally, "whether she'd approve of what I've built or whether she'd be horrified that I gave up invisibility for legitimacy." "But do you regret it?" Nathan pressed. Shani looked at the construct that had learned to ask penetrating questions, that had developed a personality distinct from the original Nathan's memories, that was becoming a person in its own right despite being made of blood magic and borrowed time. "No," she said. "I don't regret it. I made the best choice I could with the information I had, whether it was the right choice." She paused. "Ask me in a year," Nathan laughed. "That's still your answer to everything. Because it's still true," Shani said. "This work doesn't have clear endpoints. It just has moments where you assess whether you're moving in the right direction." And are we?" Nathan asked. "Moving in the right direction?" Shani looked at the garden, at the trainees who'd left for the day, at the organized beds of carefully cultivated healing plants, at the official shrine that would never be what her grandmother's wild sanctuary had been. "I think so," she said. "But ask me." "In a year?" Nathan finished. "I know." They sat together on the altar as the sun set over the castle grounds, and Shani thought about the future, about the children who would need saving, about the shrine keepers who would do that work, about the systems that would either support them or try to control them, about the choice between invisibility and legitimacy, between freedom and protection, between working alone and building institutions. Her grandmother had made one choice. Shani had made another. Which one was right? "Ask her in a year,"